kanilang matitinding kaalaman tungkol sa siyensya ng pagbubuhay at ma-neutralize yung lupa na dapat sana ay patay na kung tutuusin. Pero sa pamagitan po ng science o scientifico na ginamit nila, siyensya na kanilang in-apply, ang lupa na dating hindi mabuhayan ng halaman ay ngayon po ay talaga napaka-successful at ang mga halaman na nabubuhay ay napakalalaki na at sa darating pang panahon ay magiging halimbawa or may i-showcase natin ito sa iba't ibang panig ng daigdig na kung saan po yung may potential pang mabuhay na lupa ay pwedeng gawing berde sa pamamagitan po ng bioremediation program. At na kung saan po, sana po ibigyan pa ng lakas at talino itong mga taong ito para sa ganun mai-initiate pa nila ang kagandahang idinudulot ng bioremediation na kung saan ang salinlahi natin ang makikinabang. At kami po ay labis ang pasasalamat at labis din po ang aming kagalakan na sana po ay ituloy-tuloy ang ganitong programa at kami po ay walang hanggan ang suporta at pagtulong upang mabuhay natin ang mga lupa na dapat sana ay pinapakinabangan sa pamagitan ng maging berdeng halaman.
Let us work hand in hand to turn the brown mine-tailing areas into forests for a clearer, safer, and healthier environment to everyone. Thank you.
Bilang ama ng kagawaran ng agham at teknolohiya, masasabi kong napakahalaga ang pagsasaliksik. Ito ang pundasyon ng maliit man o malaking hakbangin sa mundo ng pagtuklas. Kasing halaga ng paglinang ng kaalaman, ang pakikipag-ugnayan sa iba't ibang grupo. Ang lahat ng ito ay patungo sa iisang layunin, ang paghubog sa kamalayan ng bayan patungo sa pag-unlad.
Ang bansa na nagbibigay ng kahalagahan sa research ay matagumpay at mas produktibo na isang bansa.
We are hoping that we will be able to reach more far-flung areas in the country. We will be able to guide them along the way and help them spur the development in their respective regions.
We implement innovative technologies by interfacing with our partners in the Icelandic community, from the academe as well as the government, to create a synergy.
As researchers, we need other people's expertise to lift our research. So we always have to collaborate.
Ay nabibigyan po ng chance ang mga ordinaryong mamamayan tulad namin na magkaroon ng kaalaman sa pag-conduct ng research para po ma-improve pa po ang aming community.
Malaking role ang ginagampanan ng science and technology sa anumang aspeto ng ating pamumuhay, anuman yung ating estado sa buhay.
With this seminar, I'm sure na-increase yung kanilang motivation, nagkaroon ng dahilan ngayon para sila ay gumawa ng mga panibagong research.
We hope that after this, lalo pa po nating may involve ang mas marami pang tao na tumulong at gumawa ng mga researchers sa kanilang mga ahensya para po sa probinsya natin at sa ating mahal na bansa.
bansa na nagbibigay ng kahalagahan sa research ay matagumpay at mas produktibo na isang bansa. NRCP Basic Regional Research Caravan, yung objective niya is to promote the importance of research to science and technology practitioners as well as managers in the provinces.
NRCP Regional Basic Research Caravan plays a very important role in reaching out to the provinces and to the far-flung areas in the country to engage them and encourage them to do R&D or research and development activities. We are hoping that we will be able to reach more far-flung areas in the country. We will be able to guide them along the way and help them spur the development in their respective regions.
That is one of our ultimate goal, to build science, technology, and innovation ecosystem in Region 12. In order to do that, we implement innovative technologies by interfacing with our partners in the extended community, from the academe, as well as the government, to create a synergy.
As researchers, we need other people's expertise to lift our research. So we always have to collaborate. I encourage everyone to apply, write a proposal to NRCP because you will be supported in all levels of activity.
Sa ngayon ay nabibigyan po ng chance ang mga ordinaryong mamamayan tulad namin na magkaroon ng kaalaman sa pag-conduct ng research para po ma-improve pa po ang aming community.
Malaking role ang ginagampanan ng science and technology sa anumang aspeto ng ating pamumuhay, anuman yung ating estado sa buhay.
Alam naman po natin na ang isa sa mahirap na ginagawa ng ating mga kapwa faculty ay ang paggawa ng research. But with this seminar, I'm sure na-increase yung kanilang motivation, nagkaroon ng dahilan ngayon para sila ay gumawa ng mga panibagong research.
Research Caravan na ito ay isang napakagandang platform upang ma-involve po natin ang ating mga researchers at iba pang mga would-be researchers upang lalo pa po natin mapaunlad ang research. We hope that after this, lalo pa po natin ma-involve ang mas marami pang tao na tumulong at gumawa ng mga researchers sa kanilang mga ahensya para po sa probinsya natin at sa ating mahal na bansa.
Lumaki ako sa isang pamayanan na buhay ang kultura at likas yaman. Nahubog ako sa kamalayan na malaki o maliit mang bagay ay mahalaga. Dahil sa tulong ng National Research Council of the Philippines, ahensya ng kagawaran ng agham at teknolohiya, ang tila maliit na hakbangin sa pagsasaliksik ay maaring lumikha ng malaking kapakinabangan sa pagpapayaman at pangangalaga sa aming katutubong kaalaman.
Let us all see the other side of a researcher's life.
This is my story, and I share.
I would never imagine that 38 years later,
stories can change lives positively. Pahalagahan natin ang bigas. Ito ay buhay.
I explore the oceans for beneficial bacteria.
We love personal stories.
Be the best version of yourself. Always.
Read a lot and write a lot.
Nakikilala ka sa husay at galing mong angking.
This is my story.
This is my story.
This is my story and I share.
B2B, back to basic.
Did you know that basic research is your ticket to advance or new research areas?
Increasing the appreciation of science through the NRCP's B2B TV and online pitch is NRCP's contribution to enhancing science culture in the Philippines.
Basic research go along the way and even in the front line of every research journey. It involves an assorted blending of an enormous range of skills and activities. Welcome to DOST-NRCP's Back to Basic or B2B online classes series.
In almost every technology that we use every day, basic science and math are working behind the scenes.
This is NRCP's new program where our scientists, artists, and experts will explain concepts in basic science.
Bear in mind that basic research does not have to be basic in the simplest sense of the word. It is something that we want you all to redefine to make it more attuned and relevant to the needs of our time.
This program aims to use the power of multimedia to translate technical information which our artists, researchers, and scientists are tirelessly generating.
We will be inviting experts from the 13 divisions of NRCP to discuss a range of topics from climate change to perhaps the current pandemic. I invite you to take part in this.
Sa pagbubukas ng 2021, meron kaming inihanda sa inyo, Experts Class.
It is the latest, the newest online platform that brings experts together to discuss the important topics in the country today.
In 2021, the National Research Council of the Philippines is pleased to announce the opening of its experts classes.
Are you a young Filipino researcher interested in publishing your work? Are you a budding NRCP scientist intending to present your findings to local and global audiences? If so, you have come to the right place. The National Research Council of the Philippines is proud to announce the Research Dissemination in Local and International Platforms, or RD-LIP Financial Grants. Under the Basic Research Information Translation for Empowerment in the Regions program, or BRIGHTER, the RD-LIP Financial Grants aim to promote a science culture in the regions. More importantly, the RD-LIP Financial Grants provide opportunities for NRCP members to share their research results and expand their horizons locally and abroad. NRCP offers two RD-LIP financial grants. The financial grant for paper presentation in international and local conferences, and the financial grant for publication in ISI or Scopus Index journals. The financial grant for paper presentation in international and local conferences offers support in disseminating research results to the general public and to a global audience. This allows NRCP members to be updated on the latest developments in their fields of specialization and establish mutually beneficial partnerships with international researchers. On the other hand, the financial grant for publication in ISI or Scopus Index journals intends to support expenses for publication of research papers in ISI or Scopus Index journals. This grant is limited to 10 NRCP members and is a first-come, first-served basis. Financial grants are now open to all budding NRCP members. Log in and submit your applications with the required documents online at the NRCP website. Use NRCP's pre-evaluation checklist for paper presentation and publication grants to guide you. Visit the NRCP RD-LIP website or Research Pod on Facebook for more information.
Good morning everyone. We shall begin our virtual program in a few moments. The National Research Council of the Philippines promotes scientific and technological culture to all sectors of society, and fosters linkages with local and international organizations, for enhanced cooperation in the development and sharing of information. With this, the NRCP joins the whole country in the celebration of the 500th anniversary of the victory in Mactan. The Philippines part of the first circumnavigation of the world, and other significant events, collectively known as the 2021 National Quincentennial Commemoration, NQC, in the Philippines. Before we begin, here are some few reminders. Please make sure that your microphones are on mute or turned off during the program. Should you have any questions and concerns during the program, please let us know through the chat box. Our staff will be ready to assist you. This event will be recorded in its entirety. Please be advised that the recording of this event in full or in part may be used for the National Research Council of the Philippines information and education materials.
(7,641 islands, 110 million people, one country, the Philippines. What is just a chain of islands, floating like brilliant beads, is a nation of wonders, of great stories, of diverse people, 110 million strong. More than red, blue, white, and yellow, we are every stroke and every blot of ink, painting the face of the earth with beautiful colors the world has ever seen. Join us as we commemorate the 500th anniversary of the victory at Mactan and the 500th anniversary of the Philippines' part in the first circumnavigation of the world. From the deep waters to the highest peaks, sail through the pages of history of a nation tempered by time. A magnet of catastrophes, we rise above our adversities. Witness as we unearth treasures locked away by fate. Hear stories silenced by noise. See beauty hidden under the ashes. Reclaim our spaces in the world of boundaries. Today is only our first draft in the history books. We will write and paint our future 500 years thereafter. We will set sail again, no matter the tide. This is our journey. This is the Philippines.
A pleasant Wednesday morning to everyone. Welcome to the National Research Council of the Philippines Quincentennial Commemorations Public Lecture Series. Today's event is the third installment in a series of lectures organized by the NRCP. Since our lectures today are done in the Visayas, let me greet you. Maayong buntag, maupay nga aga, maayong aga. Good morning, everyone. I am Dave Centeno, and I will be your host for today. First of all, I'd like to thank you for joining us in this NRCP Lecture 3. But we have more in store for you this morning. We are officially inviting interested colleagues painting competition with guidelines flashed on the screen. Should you be interested or know of a potential participant for this competition, please email us at danielfadnrcp@gmail.com. So please stay with us and enjoy our morning's program. Let us start off with the NRCP, Panalangin ng Bayan, followed by the singing of the Philippine National Anthem and the NRCP hymn.
Na kami pumakno nga nibiyagan nindat mo, idatanda kami bikan mangat na pinghud mo. Dawat mininggob hino aya tuboblemi, he ay makiwada-wada kida kami. Hey ay makiwada-wada kida kami. Hey ay makiwada-wada, hey ay makiwada-wada kida kami.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wal barakatuh. Salam pa mga kiaulungan sin Tuhan. Pianaugan niya Nabi Iban Quran. Kasilasan niya sa plag pakatilingkal alam. Maglasa kita niyo bat tumanang. Mbo Tuhan, tunggal nu sa sangdolan kami. Buwanin kami rijiki maglabi-labi. Lausangom rahmat nu subay pinugji. Hangkan kita bi subay magkasih-kasih.
Sa ngalan Pangurungan, pangutuyong Espiritong kalatag mo.
Pangurumon kang usalat, pangkalikupanan. Pangurumon kang pamirayan, pagkang walay sikog balantang nga mapagkululang. Pangurumon kang sinlakan, pangurumon kang apagatang pangurumon kang masakpan pangurumon kang suwadyan. Pangurumon kang panguruyan pangirayon pangitapan pangitoy wat kang walay sikog balantang nga makakululang.
Diyos na mapagpala, hiling namin ang pagpapalaganap ng kaalaman sa bawat nilalang.
Panginoon, dinggin mo kami.
O Diyos ng awa, bigyan mo kami ng kakayahan sa pagtataguyod ng pakikipag-ugnayan sa bawat isa.
Panginoon, dinggin mo kami.
O Diyos na mapagkalinga, mangyaring ikawan ang pagpapaunlad ng kalikasan ng tao sa mundo.
Panginoon, dinggin mo kami.
O Diyos na pag-ibig, tulutan mo ang aming bansa ng pagkakaisa at pagkakaunawaan sa gitna ng pagkakaiba-iba.
Panginoon, dinggin mo kami. Panginoon, dinggin mo kami. Panginoon, dinggin mo kami. Sa ngalan pangurungan, pangutulog, Espiritong kalatagnon, mawaling kami lijigin, upang labi-labi. Hayay makiwala-wala, hayay makiwala-wala kami. Hayay makiwala-wala kila kami. Mayang magiliw.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Mayang magiliw, presa silanganan, alam ng puso, sa litim mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, tuyad ka ng magiting, sa manlulupin, di ka pasisingin, sa dagat at puno, sa simoy, sa langit bubukang, may nilatang tula at awit sa paglayang pinamahal. Ang kisat ng matawag mo'y tagumpay na naglilinig, ang bituin at araw niya ka ng pamay magdidinig. Lupa ng araw na luwalhati pagsikta, ay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pagpay mag-api, ang mga tayang dahil sa'yo.
Throughout its history, NRCP has strived to advance the state of research and development in the country. It has acted as more than just an agency of the Department of Science and Technology and has furthered the initiative to advise policymakers through studies in both the sciences and humanities. With its influence, NRCP has had the opportunity to give its members a platform, allowing them to share their findings and insights with the country and even with the world. This August, we are proud to present yet another public lecture in the NRCP Quincentennial Commemoration that will showcase the innovation and perseverance of the Filipino people. Join us as we celebrate the history that has led us to our present. With the theme Breakthroughs for Solidarity, our distinguished guests and lecturers will make this a meaningful celebration for us as a nation of 110 million people. Due to the size and span of NRCP's reach, it requires enormous coordination between regions, divisions, and even countries. Although not an easy task, this coordination is managed expertly by NRCP's leaders for the institution to progress further and farther. To officially welcome us all in this very important lecture series event is the official who helps drive the humanities component of NRCP. Everyone, let us all welcome the Chair of the Humanities Division of the National Research Council of the Philippines, Dr. Hope S. Yu.
Secretary Fortunato de la Peña of the Department of Science and Technology, Dr. Rene Escalante, Chair of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, NRCP President Dr. Gregorio E.H. Del Pilar, our keynote speaker, Honorable Leopoldo Dominico Petilla, Governor of the Province of Leyte, and Honorable Junard Quirante Chan, Mayor of Lapu-Lapu City, Cebu. Our speakers, Dr. Rolando Borinaga and Dr. Jose Elizar Bersales, NRCP colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Maayong buntag sa tanan. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you to the NRCP Quincentennial Lecture Series. We join the National Quincentennial Commission, the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, and the whole nation in celebrating the 500th year anniversary of three major events in Philippine history. First, the role of the Philippines in the circumnavigation of the world through the Magellan Expedition. Second, the introduction of Christianity in the country. And third, the victory at the Battle of Mactan in Cebu. This celebration is meaningful and relevant to promote knowledge and understanding of the world in which our ancestors lived, moved, and paved the way for our lives today. What was the Philippines like in the 17th century? To walk into that world of our ancestors is such an edifying experience made possible by Francisco Ignacio Alcina's account, Historia de las Islas e Indios de Visayas, which is a portal to the past. I actually have the 3 volumes, but like most of us here today, we are waiting for the rest of the volumes to be published. And Dr. Rolando Borinaga is going to bring us to that little yet explored world as the book 4, which completes the part 1 of the account, is yet unpublished. I actually had a glimpse of the Cantius Kobach extant manuscript, which is housed at the Christ the King College Museum when my friend Carl Bordeos had shown me around the museum a few years ago. Now, not only will we learn about our natural history, but also look into our heroes. We celebrate not only their courage and their valor, but we will also explore the myths that have grown into fantastic claims in order to set the record straight, especially about Lapu-Lapu, the people of Cebu, and the Visayas. And this is the exciting topic of Dr. Jose Elizar Bersales' talk this morning. On behalf of the NRCP, it is with great joy that I welcome you to the lecture series. May your participation be illuminating and edifying experience.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hope S.U. Thank you. Right. Since our two lectures today are studies done in the Visayas, our keynote speaker comes from the region as well. But the impact of these studies is certainly not confined only to the Visayas, but to the entire archipelago. Like our keynote speaker, who is the incumbent governor of Leyte, yet served the entire nation as a member of the House of Representatives. Dubbed as a champion of agricultural innovations, our keynote speaker, the Honorable Governor of Leyte. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Governor Leopoldo Dominico Loreto Petilla.
Department of Science and Technology Secretary, ang aking idol, Fortunato de la Peña, DOST officials who are here today, National Research Council of the Philippines, President Gregorio del Pilar, and all the officers and members of the NRC, Mayor Junard Chan of Lapu-Lapu City, ang ating mga speakers for today, Dr. Ronaldo Burinaga and Dr. Jose Bersales, to all the guests and participants, ladies and gentlemen, good day to all. This year, we commemorate the Quincentennial or the 500th anniversary of the Christianization and the Catholicization of the Philippines. And not only that, also marks the beginning of the Spanish occupation of the Philippines. 500 years ago, Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese explorer who was hired by King Philip of Spain, has discovered the Philippine island, landing here in the island of Leyte, where they held the historic and first Catholic Mass in the country. Then he proceeded to occupy other lands, and then going to Central Visayas, which was the most populous area in the part of the Visayas during that time, which was Mactan or Cebu. No? And there in Cebu, he was met by a fierce local chieftain named Lapu-Lapu, who resisted the occupation. So in that battle of Mactan, Ferdinand Magellan was killed by Lapu-Lapu himself. Despite of the death of Ferdinand Magellan, the Spaniards nonetheless proceeded and occupied the island and the rest of the country eventually. That year played a very important role in crafting or forming our history. History will tell us the reasons why we are here today, what we are, and who we are. So that's very important. It is full of lessons that we can use basically to develop our future into a better country. So history is very important. In fact, when we were hit by Yolanda in 2013, the devastation was really unimaginable. We had to find ways for us to recover very quickly from this. For instance, how do we recover the economy? So we had to look in the past to understand how economy started, how it evolved, how it developed, so that we will know what to do to make our province, the province economy recover. And indeed, not only did Leyte recover, but it recovered very quickly from the typhoon. In just 2 years after the typhoon, the poverty rate of the province of Leyte was already 7.8% lower than the poverty rate before the typhoon. And then we continued to push for that development with the Leyte Economics Program, our flagship program. To cut the long story short, today, it's not only that we were able to recover very quickly from Yolanda, but we have a strong economy now, even with the pandemic. Businesses are still open, investors are still investing, creating tens of thousands of jobs. We have attained food sufficiency. We won over insurgency. We're now insurgency-free, and many more. All this, again, we started from the past. It's just like a computer or a gadget, that our gadgets, if there's something wrong, we reboot it. No? And then most of the problems can be resolved by rebooting. So we just had to reboot the economy of Leyte and go back to the past. And now, this is what we have attained. Today, our nation is faced with lots of difficult challenges, such as poverty, insurgency, culture of corruption, social injustice, inequality, and many more. These are historical problems, I suppose, because when did this problem start? Nobody knows. It's as far as we can remember. And until now, we're still fighting these challenges. But to me, these challenges are just symptoms of something bigger. As one of our great philosophers, Plato, has said, that our biggest enemy is within us. So actually, it's ourselves, no? So inside us is a never-ending struggle for good to prevail over evil, for charity and compassion to prevail over greed, for humility to prevail over pride and self-centeredness, and most of all for love to prevail over hatred. And to win this battle, we need to be guided by our past, our history. It's there in our history, no less than the teachings of our Lord Jesus Christ about love. The teachings of Allah are there. We can learn from it and use it, our learnings, to win this battle. And also, as social being, we need others to win this battle. We need our family, we need our parents, we need our friends, relatives, we need our community, we need our country, because we need each other in order for us to win this battle. And if we can win this battle as a country, then that's the time we can achieve peace and harmony and prosperity, something that we have been longing for generations. You see, our history can build a better nation. History is our greatest teacher. But unfortunately, a lot of people do not listen to their teachers. That's why we never learn. That's why these problems persist. So all we need to do now, just to keep on reminding people of our past and remind them to learn from their past, basically. So that's why a lot of people do not see the importance of commemorating such event right now, like the Quincentennial anniversary of the Christianization and Catholicization of the country. But we have to commemorate to remind us of the past and to learn from it, so that we can move forward and build a better country. So no less than your activity today. So I would like to express my appreciation to the DOST, the National Research Council, and all the participants who are here today. I would like to thank you for gracing, for doing such activity, itong activity ngayon, because this will play an important role in reminding people to listen to our greatest teacher, so that we can move and develop ourselves a better future for us all. So, for that, I salute you, ang ating mga participants and organizers, and I thank you sa inyong pakikibaka para sa bayan. So with that, mabuhay kayo. Mabuhay ang bansang Pilipinas at mabuhay ang sambayanang Pilipino. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you very much, the Honorable Governor of Leyte, Leopoldo Dominico Loreto Petilla. Mabalat, Governor. I could see in our chat box that our audiences are saying they love the message of Governor Petilla. Indeed, history tells us of who we are today and who we were yesterday, of course, and it guides us of where to go, like a great teacher. All right. Our first lecturer this morning is a full professor at the School of Health Sciences at the University of the Philippines in Palo, Leyte. He is a lifetime member of the Philippine National Historical Society, where he is also a member of the Editorial Advisory Board of the Journal of History and has edited a number of recent issues of the journal. He served as Visayas representative from 2014 to 2016 and from 2017 to 2019 in the National Committee on Historical Research of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, and functioned as Secretary of the NCHR Executive Council. His lecture this morning will present the pre-colonial Eastern Visayas in Alcina's Historia de Visayas. Scholars, students, scientists, ladies and gentlemen, our first lecturer this morning, please welcome Professor Rolando O. Borinaga.
Ang buntag ka natong tanan. Good morning. May I share with my slides for this presentation? Okay, the title of my lecture is Pre-Colonial Eastern Visayas and Alcina's Historia the Visayas. Okay. The Alcina manuscripts of 1668 titled the Historia de las Islas y Indios de Visayas are the only comprehensive ethnographical and historical accounts of the Visayas region in the 17th century. Written by Jesuit Father Francisco Ignacio Alcina, these manuscripts consisted of two parts. Part 1 in 4 books deals with the natural history of the Visayas, that is including the location, the fertility, and the nature of these islands and their inhabitants. Part 2 in 5 books deals with the supernatural and the ecclesiastical, that is, on matters concerning the faith and their growth in it through the teaching and instruction of the fathers of the Society of Jesus. Now, this slide shows on the left the title page of the Alcina manuscripts, and on the right cover of the book, one volume published by part 1 published by the UST Press a decade ago. All 4 books of part 1 had been accounted for, and volumes 1 to 3 were published with the English translation and annotations during the first decade of 2000, 2002, 2004, and 2005. About part 2 on the portion of book 1 and the full books 2 and 3 had been accounted for. Books 4 and 5 are lost. The extant manuscripts of part 2 were published with English translations and annotations in numerous issues of Filipiniana Sacra from 1978 to 1982. This slide shows the entire set of Alcina in my library. The tracking, transcribing, translating to English, annotating, and publishing of and preparing for publication of all the extant copies of the Alcina manuscripts were virtually singular tasks undertaken by the late Father Cancius Cobac, OFM, a Franciscan who was assigned for a long time at the Christ the King College in Calbayog City, Samar. Now, my presentation will deal with the unpublished Alcina, Part 1, Book 4. The slide shows on the left the typescript in Spanish, and on the right the volume of English translations by Father Cobac. The contents of Part 1, Book 4 were actually published in Part 1, Book 1 in the volumes started by the UST Press in 2000. Now, the introduction of Part 1, Book 4, still the unpublished Alcina, outlines its contents concerning their mode of life in common and as individuals, whether they had towns and villages and what kind these were, whether they had kings or why they did not have them, and concerning their customs, laws, or practices and procedures, about their wars, their manners of making slaves, the punishment of transgressions and other customs characteristically theirs, also whether they had or whether there were giants on these islands, and whether there were dwarfs and other monstrosities. The first chapter was asked whether or not they had towns or poblaciones. The background of this is that in 1589, Father Jose Plasencia documented that the basic form of government in the Philippines was the barangay. That's how the Spaniards read the word barangay, although we read it as barangay. The problem with his recommendation was that the Tagalog settlement was actually balangay, not barangay. Barangay was the Visayan word for the ancient boat that our ancestors used to travel to our islands, and the name of our settlement was something else. I will mention it later. No? Now, Father Alcina said we had poblaciones, and they were called lungsor or bungto, lungsod, bungto, and in Tagalog it was actually called bayan. But it seems that they were not ruled by they were confederate structures, not ruled by a dato who was basically a king in the barangay, who had executive, legislative, and judicial powers. Now, he mentioned about a town in Ibabaw. This was actually the northeastern part of Samar. In Cabo del Espiritu Santo, he mentioned about Lauang, which was the domain of Dato Caragrag and Tumarao. Now, at the time when Father Plasencia recommended barangay as the basic form of government in the Philippines, the name of the basic settlement ruled by a dato in the Visayas was Gamuro. Now, other terms came up, Haop, Sakop, and Duluhan. Presumably, this came up after the Spaniards introduced the concept of pueblo after reducing settlements. Pueblo with a town center and its component barangays. So the village leaders were no longer just the traditional datos, but included appointees of the priests or encomenderos, mainly for tribute collection. So, for instance, in Haop, they had a leader there in charge for tribute collection. Haop and Sakop. Duluhan was apparently a place where they had to hand in the tribute collected. Now, chapter 3 of the unpublished Alcina pertained to house construction and dwellings. We had 4 major types of houses depending on the location and the particular need. The first was the datos house, large, more ostentatious dwelling. They were called gitugasi, built of tugas, molabi, built of hard and incorruptible timber. And then there were the datos relatives house, smaller but suitable and strong. In Scott's book, Dr. Scott's book, Barangay, he basically illustrated the basic house of the dato during pre-colonial years. Now, the third type of housing is called balay-balay. 3 types, bugawan for scaring animals in the farm, puronan where one can sleep, and lagkawan, resting place or a simple inn. It seems this was the balay-balay, which were temporary houses, had been romanticized into our bahay kubo, which had been made to represent the houses of the ancient Filipinos, which was not supposed to be the case. The bahay kubo was just supposed to be the temporary farm houses, which can be abandoned after 1 or 2 harvest seasons, when the farmers would have to transfer to another kaingin. And then the fourth type of house was the ili. They were built on top of trees above the ground for security and protection. Now, Father Alcina actually had an illustration of the houses. This was one is the datos house, and smaller segment of that would be the datos relatives house, and the ili on top of trees or on the top of the hill. Now, about political organization, they did not have kings, but had a name for it, hadi. For the social classes, the dato was the head of gamuro. The second was Tumao, which is not yet found in our textbooks. It was actually Father Alcina who mentioned Tumao as a social class in the Philippines and in the Visayas. So in 1668, when he wrote his manuscript, they were already regarded as principales, equivalent to the Tagalog Maharlikas. The Tumao are free individuals with no mark of slavery. They were closest to datos and nearest relatives and of the same stock. The third was the Timawa. And it looks like the early Spaniards could not seem to differentiate Timawa and Tumao. But then the Timawa were sons of datos from their concubines and also the freed slaves. And the last was Uripon, slaves. So, but what we are taught in our textbook is only Alipin, not the Uripon, or in Cebuano, it's Ulipon. Now, what were the reasons for making slaves? Father Alcena outlined enumerated 6 reasons for making slaves. One was gamat, ambush. This referred to captives in war or conflict situation. When they are captured, they were made slaves by the people who captured them. Second is trespassing. If you trespass in another village, then you can be captured and made a slave. Third is loan default. 4 is murder. 5 is adultery. And 6 is voyeurism. I term it voyeurism. Because if you are caught watching eavesdropping the wife or daughters of the dato taking a bath in the stream or river, then you can be made a slave. Regarding the types of slaves, what we have been taught were the Tagalog version. Aliping namamahay who live in their own house, and aliping sa gigilid who live in the master's house. Now, for the Visayas, there had been mistranscriptions, even in Alcina's manuscript. So, Alcina had tubay or namatay, which is actually tuhay and namahay. And what was written there by his secretary was haishai instead of hayay. Other sources wrote it in the Baxter Codex is Tuheus and Hayuheus, and Luarca was wrote it as Ayui. Now, I actually sorted this out a few years ago, and I have come to the conclusion that, of course, the Visayan, our slaves are called Uripon or Ulipon, and the classification had moral labels, according to moral labels. The first is tuhay, literally correct, proper, right, which is the equivalent of the aliping namamahay in Tagalog society. Second is hayahay, originally the most exploited Uripon who stayed at the master's house. Its meaning became carefree and comfortable. The meaning of hayahay became carefree and comfortable after the abolition of slavery starting in the 1580s. Then the third is bihag, captive or captured in war. When conscripted, they were called Huruhanes in the Baxter Codex and Halon in Luarca's account. But I would prefer to believe that the bihag who were conscripted were called Halwan or Madfis, which could have been the private rank among the native warriors. On their manner of governing, the datos were the absolute lords, judged on all matters, and they promulgate orders. He was assisted by the paratawag, the town crier who disseminates the orders, and the parawali who gives advice or guidance. The parawali could be a council of elderly villagers. Now, trade and commerce, the money used. Their trade and commerce mostly involved direct barter of goods. And their wealth was, the number one form of wealth was slaves. Ripon. Second was gold. Silver was not valued very highly. And the third were bahandi, actually plates, ceramic items, agong, bronze, and metal gongs. Note that land was still communal and not private property at the time. When slavery was abolished in the 1580s, it can be considered the modern version of plunder. Without paying their masters, they were just freed by the early Spanish colonizers from slavery, and so they were called the hayahay. Now, feasts, banquets, dances, and entertainments. Bisaya in its root really means joyfulness. They had feasts and merriment every time an occasion presented itself. Marriage, birth of children, end of the mourning period for the dead, departure for wars, and return from wars, especially if victorious. Now, pag-anitos was the rituals for the anitos or deities. The feasts, for the feast, the food was placed on the floor. They did not have tables, and they were cooked by boiling or roasting. The preferred meals were those which have broth called sabaw and cooked with tanglad, lemongrass. Dances were of the three types. One was patad-patad, literally shaking of legs, stamping of feet. Patad-patad was a male dance, more of war rehearsal, with dancers carrying kalasag, shield, grease blades, and spears. The second was tarok, dance of men and women in pairs. The kigal was the dance of one woman alone. Now, Alcina had illustrations of their dances. Earlier, I presented this to show the houses, but there are two warriors there actually doing patad-patad. And here on the right, if it's the woman dancing alone, then it's called kigal. But if she had a male partner, then it's called tarok. They had also songs they called ambahan, not canta, which is Spanish. They had songs that accompany the dances. The songs were usually two blank verses sung in various tunes. And their amusements and games included playing the kasing or tap, kote in Cebuano, and wrestling. And then they had stories and riddles for the evening in the house. Titiguhon for riddles, and susumaton or sarita for tales. Now, pusong was fable, actually, fable. I don't know how it became Juan Pusong or tall tale in our time, but the original meaning of pusong is a fable. And then they had dolls, or called the bata-bata. Pertaining to wars and weapons, their offensive weapons include the first is bangkaw, spear, usually made of iron or with metal point. And then second is the kris, daggers or poniards, wavy blade. And the third was kampilan, machetes. And fourth is baladaw, short dagger. It would seem that the kampilan was really more of a ceremonial weapon displayed during social occasions. It seems the kris was actually the most preferred blade instrument, which was very useful in almost face-to-face situation during ambush combats. For defensive weapons, the first was kalasag or shield, which was usually 6 palmos long and 2 palmos in width. Second was taming, bucklers, which was round, And then barote, which is coats of mail, and then the pudong, or turban. Again, this is the photo of the kalasag, this one, and then this the taming, and then they had their weapons and things like that. And from Amaya, I took this picture of Marian Rivera with her barote. For unclassified weapons, they include hagos, lance made of bagakay or bamboo, and balatik, crossbow, which is usually set up and used for hunting wild pigs. Now, pinayusan was a fancy pudong and G-string, distinguishing dress of the most daring and brave. In terms, the manner of fighting wars mainly included gamat, ambushes, and ambuscades, the most common form. There was rarely face-to-face fighting during the pre-Spanish era. They had raiding expositions which had been confused by outsiders. One was pagahat, which was a raiding expedition done by land. And the second was pangiyaw, or also pangayaw, raiding expedition by sea. The use of barangays of caracoas, boats filled with hagos, bamboo lances, and slings called abiyog or labiyog. Now, okay, this slide shows the caracoa of the ancient Filipinos that they used for fighting wars. What differentiated caracoa from the ordinary barangay was the warboat caracoa was designed like a bakunawa or sea serpent. For many years, actually, scholars failed to notice the shape of the warboat. They thought it was just an artistic license that they had. These were drawn that way, but they were actually fashioned like they were bakunawa, sea serpents. Now, the folk heroes like Lapu-Lapu was called the Daraganga, local hero with exceptional strength and bravery. And for the Quincentennial, they use the word Pagani. Bayani is actually Tagalog. Now, regarding marriage, they had very special elements. There were steps in negotiation toward marriage. So one was pagtandog or pugol, after the intention was revealed by the man's side, designed to proceed, or that permission was granted for the discussion. Then it is followed by pamangkaw, a close relative of the girl, asked for a spear of its value. And then the patagdol, the use of a bolo to hack at the ladder that was extended down. The bolo becomes the possession of the person who let the ladder fall from the girl's house. Then kagoon, intermediaries who attend to the marriage arrangements. They carry a large plate with small sticks to represent the bugay, dowry being negotiated. But kagoon, actually, the modern interpretation of kagoon is just basically eating. The fifth is pagtingog. To speak after serving the buyo chu, they discuss the dowry and to pay what has been agreed upon. Additional demands, usually by the girl's family, was himiraw, payment for sleeplessness when the girl was still a baby. And the hingisol was payment for last-minute objectors to move aside. Isol, to move aside. Then pagtugpo, to join together or to lean against each other. The groom removes the cloth that covers the bride's head. It's called hingisol, obstruction or impediment. But he pays a hingalo, payment for the shame, usually a gem, during the marriage ceremony. And then the feast starts. The bride and groom serve together from the same plate. Pagsaro, sharing of food is difficult if hingalo is not given. Each gives the other a kumol, fistful of rice. The bride throws the rice down the ladder, and the groom throws the rice out of the front of the house. And then the feast continues. And then they had obstacle rituals, particularly if the person being married was a dato and binukot. At nightfall, when the groom wishes to enter the room of the binukot wife, he was detained until he pays a gift called the halot. Now, with the groom inside, a slave smokes the room pagtuob from under the house. Then the person doing the smoking is paid to stop it. And then paga or pagsuga to illuminate. A slave woman enters the room of the bride and the groom, bringing a lighted torch. She is also paid to go away with the torch, leaving the husband and wife in the room. The length of feasting, the day of the wedding, plus the day of the wedding plus 3 following days for any people of lower rank. And then 8 to 10 consecutive days for principales. So basically weddings during those times are very expensive, only for the expense for the food. Pagkangay was the general celebration on day 1. Now, post-wedding expectations, pangagar or pangagad. Son-in-law stays in the house of the father-in-law for a year. Then later, pagdara, take the wife to the house of the parents of the groom, which includes another hoist for money. Pagtukas sankayang, to remove the owning of the boat that was used to transport the wife, the husband's domain. The husband would have to give some gem to the wife. Pagsurog sinsalog, to induce the river. Gift for slave who goes out to fetch water for the first meal of the couple in the husband's place. Pagbutang san kahoy, gift for slave who brought the firewood to cook the first meal. And then there's a called bantal, the father-in-law's gift as counterpart for the bugay, dowry. Regarding dominion over possessions, the subjection of wives to husbands was more personal than absolute. The husband could not give away or dispose gold without the permission of the wife. Slaves are subject to the master of the house, though they might belong to the wife. Husband and wife both go equally to search or barter for food and sustenance. Equal obligation. Morality and teaching, women teach and set aright their husbands. When husband dies, the woman tries to have his slaves or gold returned to his family. Sapul was something gained from the common labor of husband and wife. There's a sharing for sapul, 1/3 to the children and descendants. This is the common conjugal property. And 2/3 to the widow. And himalo, payment of the widow from part of the dowry, 1/10 usually to interested parties, the relatives. Inheritance and succession had been discussed by other authors. Wives do not inherit from their husbands, nor husbands from their wives, whether they have children or not. The nearest relatives have the right to inheritance. Regarding validity and stability of marriage, there had been an opinion at that time. It goes to this day that the dissolution of marriage was easy among the natives. That they easily separated from each other for the slightest reasons. Now in Alsina claimed that this was just partly true. The separation was more of an abuse than a custom. He had statistics to show that 2 out of 10 or 20% cultivated, 1/5 usually separated after they were wed. But few rarely separated among ordinary people. Those who did would return afterwards to be together again. Most of them married with only one wife and persevered with her until death. This is for the men. But the practice of having sandil or concubines was more general and common at the time. Now, principalas or binukots at the time had their own difficulties. Most noble ladies, principalas of the binukots, were usually married and are still married against their will than the common people. Family interest, selling daughters to who will give them the most. There's the concept of kando, which is basically the Visayan epic, and the karandoon, an experience of epic proportion. Now, there are famous epics involving famous principalas of binukots in the Visayas. The most famous is actually Dato Sumanga and Bubong Humasanon. Bubong Humasanon from Bohol, their Dato Sumanga, probably from Samar, to conduct slave raiding on her behalf. So, Dato Sumanga conducted raids on Tandag, Camiguin, Siquijor, Dapitan, Jolo, and eventually China. Then the second is Kabungaw and Bubong Ginbuna. This dramatized Bubong Ginbuna's difficulties with Kabungaw's family, the mother and sister. And then the third is the Ibdang, principalas or binukot, who were abducted by prospective husbands. From Jolo to Samar, from Jolo, they came to Samar to plunder and search for other women of quality. It's called the abduct now and marry later. Now, were the giants? Were the people eaters of human flesh in Sandugo? That's the concern of one chapter. There was a consistent tradition of giants among all natives in the Visayas. Now, the term for giant was Puya. At that time, Puya was the giant. In our time, Puya is a baby. Then Murong-Burongan was a giant whose head could reach the clouds. And he had wife and children. Another giant was called Linog in Baccher Codex. He lived in Limasawa, Panting, Punta ng Ipon, and also in the coast of, he was also known in the coast of Kabalian. Incidentally, these areas supposedly resided by Linog is along the most earthquake-prone part of the Philippine fault. In Punta de Bulilaki, in the north of Cebu, Father Alcin mentioned shin bones of giants found in a cave. Now, there will always be the details will stay precisely because of certain things found in Samar. So this is supposed to be the giant footprint on that had been made that had on rock in Kapul Island, northern Samar, and something believed to be a giant footprint in Suluan in southeastern Samar. Now, were the Visayans eaters of human flesh? or cannibals, Father Alcina said it's a bad imputation. The food among the natives was fish, widely used. Pork, deer, cattle, and other meat are least among what they ate at the time. Pertaining to sandug or blood compact, a carlet is made, blood mixed with wine and drunk by two parties to indicate a sign of friendship, confederation, and union. Then concerning pygmies or dwarfs, the term at the time was bunga. Of course, we now use the word Spanish word duende, and for the giant we use gigante. Now, the bunga did not exceed half the length of the arm of a man of normal size. There's a tale meant by Alcina that actually human puppets fought against the gigantic pusong in Calbiga and killed him, a giant named Pusong. Na in Pambuhan, Father Alcina noted 4.5 million palmos in height, male and female. He met there two bunga, male and female. He joked that they marry each other, but they didn't. Now, part 1, book 4 included a colophon by Father Alcina titled Soledad or Solitude. Consisted of 700 lines of verse dedicated to Father Rafael Bonafe, who arrived in the Philippines with Father Alcina in 1632 and later became Father Provincial of the Jesuits and died in 1668. It incorporates excellent knowledge of Greek and Roman mythology, and the poem is a very successful effort in extolling the beauty and wonders of nature of the Visayas region. Damo nga salamat. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Rolando Borinaga, for shedding light on Eastern Visayas history in the lens of a Jesuit historian. We now appreciate more the concepts from the community systems, architecture, politics, arts, among other important aspects of our society that we still use nowadays, that are anchored onto our local history. Some of these we only knew from popular media such as TV shows, as you had a clip on Marian Rivera there. Now with richer understanding. We hope that our younger generations, of course, and everyone, understand better our present cultures and identities. Now we will proceed to the open forum. Our moderator this morning is an assistant professor at the Department of History of the Ateneo de Manila University. He is the editor of Philippine Studies, Historical and Ethnographic Viewpoints. He also authored the book, A Capital City at the Margins, Quezon City and Urbanization in the 20th Century Philippines, published by the Ateneo Press. Ladies and gentlemen, our moderator for this morning, please welcome Dr. Michael D. Pante.
Thank you, Dr. Centeno, and thank you, Dr. Borinaga, for that enlightening lecture on Alcina's very significant contribution to Philippine historiography. And now we open our webinar this morning to questions from our participants here in our Zoom room. Actually, we already have quite a number of questions for you, Dr. Borinaga. So we jump right into these questions, beginning with one from Professor Maragtas Amante, who asks, Father Alcina was essentially reporting to the Father General of the Society of Jesus on the progress of missionary work to evangelize the Visaya. Aside from reporting to the Catholic Church social and cultural details, did Father Alcina reflect on how the Visaya understood the saving gospel of Jesus Christ and the Catholic faith?
Well, I prefer to believe that, among the Jesuits, Father Alcina was actually accused or as the great defender of the Visayans. But it seems he was a very successful missionary precisely because he knew the language. He knew the language very well. In fact, he compiled a vocabulary that's no longer found. But he was able, especially in his history of the Jesuits, he seemed to have been very acceptable all over the place. But the thing there is that because of his extreme familiarity with the Visayan language, it's very important always.
Yes, Professor Borinaga, and another one from the same Professor Amante. He notes, Professor Amante notes, Professor Borinaga noted that Father Alcina observed Bisaya means joyfulness for festive occasions.
Joyfulness.
As
yes.
used in the
Happy,
Samar
happy.
Ibabaw.
Yeah.
And then in Bisaya, it's kasadyahan, sadya in Cebu, kalipayan, kalipay in Panay Negros. Now, the question is, for people in Samar, Leyte, Cebu, Panay Negros, do they share the same meaning of Bisaya?
Well, the thing there is that our colonial years basically segregated people according to provinces, and the Moro raids restricted the movements of peoples such that we had actually originally what I call the supra-Visayan language, which was documented by Father Sanchez with a dictionary completed in 1616 and published in 1711. We had a large Visayan language understood by all, and it seems the concept of Bisaya at the time was understood across the entire geography. What happened afterwards in the succeeding centuries is that Cebuano evolved as a separate language, and Ilonggo evolved as a separate language from a large language called the Binisaya among the natives.
Thank you, Dr. Borinaga. And then another one from Voltaire Oizon. Is gamat not a typo error by Alcina? It should be gamak with a glottal stop at the last vowel. Gamak, if I'm pronouncing that right.
There's actually a version for that, Gama, but I have documented in my hometown that an old person, the priest founder of our town had I guess a cousin or a relative whose nickname was called Gamat, and he was actually responsible for the type ambush combats. So there's Gama, but there's also Gamat. Maybe some sort of a dialect differentiation.
Thank you for that clarification. And now, to the next one. This one is about. Wait a minute. Is there a synonym, or is there no synonym for principalas or principales, which sounds Spanish? And I think it is from Spanish. So is there a synonym for principales in the native language?
Well, at least as far as Father Alcina is concerned, one group was called the Dato and the family, and Tumao, which only actually Father Alcina had. There were two. The Dato was really more of the political type, and the Tumao were just basically the local elite who were mostly who posed as the basic army of the pre-colonial society. They were just fused as principales later.
Okay. Now, the next question is rather technical. It's more of how to cite sources from Ramil Arciosa. I would like to ask about the citation of books in history, such as Alcina's manuscript. It's published way back 1900, 1800. So how about the APA format? I think we're not in a position. It's really about the differences in citation styles. So it's better if you consult the actual style guide rather than ask Dr. Borinaga. But I think, yeah, citation styles do have their own respective ways of citing old publications. Now, this one is, it pertains to the topic at hand. Was polygamy allowed? It's being asked by Jürgen Primavera.
What was the
was
question?
Was polygamy allowed in the early Visayan communities?
Polygamy was allowed, of course, if the husband can afford it. We had basically it was basically a problem among the early missionaries in Leyte, because they had to convince some of the powerful datos to part with their wives so that they could be baptized as Christians. Many of them did, but a few basically refused. Took a long time for them to divorce and just retain one wife.
Yes. And a quick follow-up to that, Dr. Borinaga, from Ronald Rafal, since this is connected to the previous question. What is the term for the datus concubines, or is there a term for the datus concubines?
It's mentioned there, sandil.
Okay. So it was mentioned during the lecture. So it's I think there's a follow-up here. So polygamy was mainly polygyny, not polyandry. This is more of a technical differentiation.
It's really a husband with several wives.
Yes.
Not.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Now, moving on from Ismael Fortunato, are giants real? Why did they vanish? Those giants you mentioned during your lecture.
Well, that's something I really could not. that's something that I could not answer. But there's an entire Father Alcina recorded an entire belief system that they had giants during ancient times, and as I showed you two pictures towards the end of the lecture, they had footprints in two ends of Samar, northwest and southeast.
Or maybe a plausible explanation based on scientific evidence and documentary evidence. Can you offer us a plausible explanation for this?
There's basically, aside from folklore, there's really not much evidence.
Okay. And then moving on from Kim Victor Nepomuceno, does a babaylan or was a babaylan part of a social class? Is there any specific design of house for the babaylan?
I think the babaylan basically had a house, second category of house, not as big as that of the dato, just perhaps a house smaller than that, like that of the dato's relatives, because they were actually a social class on the category of the dato, but they had actually greater role, religious and medical role in ancient society. They were also the teachers and things like that.
Okay. Thank you. And then we have here two questions pertaining to raids. One from Jürgen Primavera. So raids started with the Bisaya to capture women rather than with Mindanao Muslims capturing slaves, such as, for example, from Bicol, which is based on Jürgen's impression, based on stories from Bicol. And then there's another question regarding raids regarding Pangayaw. How much did early documents devote to slave raiding? When did the term Pangayaw start to be a political term And was there a time when it was still a neutral concept?
Which, pangayaw?
Yes, the pangayaw.
Well, the pangayaw is basically illustrated by the epic of Dato Sumanga and Bubong Humasanon. They raided all over the place just to give slaves for Dato Sumanga to give to Bubong Humasanon. It's described actually this part is in Dr. Scott's book Barangay, the entire set of epics as summarized by Father Alcina. As for the he also mentioned elsewhere that there are no specific summarized epics, that some tribes from Mindanao actually came to Samar to raid for wives. The intention here was basically not to kill, but just to get the wife item. And there's actually in Kapul Island, the folklore of Kapul Island is that these are Samals from Mindanao who waited out in the island until the chief can get the acceptance of the wife item living in the mainland of Samar.
Just to go back to the question from Jurgen, I think that the essence of the question was to pinpoint who started the raids. But is there a way for us to pinpoint or to determine who began this practice of slave raiding? Was it the Bisaya, or was it the from people from Mindanao, or there's no way for us to really determine?
There's no way for us to, but it can be if we have to take the epic of Dato Sumanga, the raids could be dated early to the documented raid in China in the 1100s, documented by Chao Jukwang. It could have been that raid on China to give slaves to the Bubong Humasanon. That's the fictional version of a recorded raid in China centuries earlier. Could have been.
Thank you for that detailed answer, Dr. Borinaga. Now, moving on from Fernie Lim, from where did the metals used in the weaponry come from?
Well, in fact, the raid on China was also intended to get metals. At least that's maybe they got it also from other areas. Like at the time, Brunei was actually the center of trade in the 14th century, and then the metal could have come from Champa, could have come from China, and
so there were no local mining sites or metalsmithing industries in the Visayas at that time.
There is no mention of knowledge of mining for metals. They basically had to get that from other places.
Thank you, Dr. Borinaga. And now we move to, I think, perhaps the last three questions, since we have to move on to the next speaker, from an anonymous attendee. In my history classes in the university, there's always the concern with using Spanish historians' pre-colonial narratives, that these may not be truly reflective of the experiences of Filipinos since they were written from a foreign perspective. Is the same concern also true in this work of Father Alcina? And how is this addressed?
The thing there is that the good thing about Father Alcina is that he provided the native words. And that is something that we should interpret for ourselves. Because he had, in many cases, he had a different interpretation. But if you are a native Visayans, if you see the word, you can actually use your own interpretation of what they mean.
Thank you. And since we're comparing Alcina's work with other early colonial documents, another anonymous attendee, was there or were there big differences in the customs of the Tagalog to that of the Visayans as described by Juan de Plasencia?
Well, we just have to read. Father Dr. Scott's Barangay. There's a great differentiation there of Tagalog and Bisaya, and
Okay.
other cultural groups.
Thank you. And from Presilda Rebato, it was noted that husband and wife share the same obligation or equal obligation, preferably on the modern words that both can work. They can both work. My question is how most of the wives ended up just staying at home and taking care of the children, dominated by their husbands, when it was not really the tradition during that time.
Well, at least for the Timawa and the slave class, the wives were actually the ones who stayed at home and they worked. They worked like our common wives nowadays. Not so much for the binukot because they were basically senioras, but for the lower classes, the wives had to work because their husbands were almost always out for war. Not.
Thank you. And perhaps I think we should use this as our last question as we move on to the next speaker. From Vicente Calibo, the word balanghay comes from Antonio Pigafetta. He wrote this word for the first time when he was in Mazawa. If Mazawa is Limasawa, therefore balanghay pronounced balangay is a Limasawa word. What was the language of Limasawa at the time of Alcina?
Father Alcina had actually visited Masawa because it was part of his coverage as he was assigned with the in Carigara Residential. He had actually traveled up to Kabalian in southern Leyte. The Visayas language at the time was not what we now have as it was really a combination of what I call the Supra-Visayan language. Not yet the specifically Cebuano, wala pa yung Surigao Y, Soyigaw, wala pa yon. There were not. These words are found that the vocabulary are found in the Sanchez Dictionary, 1711. It was what I call the Binisaya, the Supra-Binisaya type of language.
Thank you, Dr. Borinaga, for patiently answering all our questions and for sharing with us your insights. And I also want to thank the participants in our Zoom meeting. I know there are a lot of other questions left unanswered in our chat box here, but unfortunately, we have to move on to our next speaker. Maybe later, if we do have time at the end of our second speaker, at the end of the Q&A portion of our second speaker, maybe we can accommodate these unanswered questions. But for now, let me now turn you over once again to Dr. Centeno to introduce our second speaker. Dr. Centeno?
Thank you very much to our first lecturer, Professor Borinaga, for graciously answering the questions and responding very well to the comments of our audiences. Thank you, of course, to our excellent moderator, Dr. Michael Pante, for facilitating the discussion. Very lively indeed. Our audiences are really engaged and interested in learning more about the concepts that Professor Borinaga presented. Again, for those who are interested in joining the painting competition, the details are pasted in our chat box. We will also post the recording of this event in our NRCP website. All right, moving on. Our second lecturer is a professor at the Department of Anthropology, Sociology, and History at the University of San Carlos in Cebu and the director of the USC Museum. He currently heads the National Committee on Museums of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. He is also the Cebu Provincial Consultant for Museum and Heritage Affairs. Jobbers has written or co-authored a number of books, including The War in Cebu, a finalist in the 2016 National Book Awards, and Salapi, the Numismatic Heritage of the Philippines, which won a Platinum Anvil and a Gold Anvil in the 50th Anvil Awards in 2014. Ladies and gentlemen, our second lecturer, who will share with us about saving the historic Lapu-Lapu and Cebu from myths and misconceptions, please welcome Professor Jose Eleazar R. Bersales.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to the National Research Council of the Philippines. And thank you, Dr. Centeno, for the introduction. My presentation is entitled Demystifying the Past, Saving Historic Cebu and Lapu-Lapu from Myths and Fake News. In 1931, I think the idea of fake news started only very recently, but way back in 1929, there were already attempts to create a myth behind Lapu-Lapu, as shown by this Progress newspaper, which showed that his tobacco pipe, his pestle, and that of his wife were supposedly discovered in Mactan. So way back in 1929, there were already attempts locally to show a connection to Lapu-Lapu. And this, in fact, there was a promise, if you see it here, that the antiques will be exhibited for the 1930 carnival. I think the Alho, or the club that was supposed to be discovered by the Barte family, who were supposed to be directly related over 400 years previously to Lapu-Lapu, and who averred that they were relatives of Lapu-Lapu or descendants of Lapu-Lapu. There is supposedly a photo of them presenting the club, or Alho. Much like, this is the period when you find Tarzan, the movie. And for some reason, they connected probably Tarzan and his club with Lapu-Lapu also owning a club, a staff that he used to kill supposedly Magellan. There is a photo of him presenting, of that family presenting the club to Serios Many. I cannot find the photo anymore. The club supposedly disappeared in 1945 during the liberation bombings of Manila. It would have been very, very good to study the club and find out how old the tree was. In 1980s, a book by Linda Kiman, in fact, begins a chapter on glimpses in the history of early Cebu, with Lapu-Lapu using the very same club. And if you go to Lapu-Lapu City, you will find a statue of him holding that very weapon, because according to what I will tell you later, the lore was that Lapu-Lapu did not use his weapon, his kris or his kampilan, because it would not strike the iron, the metal cuirass protections, the armor of Magellan. Instead, the Alho would be very powerful if he used it to hit the head of Magellan. For some reason, I do not know why they think the people who invented this story thought that a kalis or a kris or a kampilan would not be as powerful, or even more powerful, in hitting the head of Magellan, that would eventually kill him. So that kind of storytelling from 1929 continued in 1980 in a published book would continue into the present. For example, you find in Wikipedia, and that is why scholars and researchers are always told, never use Wikipedia as your scholarly citation, or your source, especially your thesis, your scholarly articles, and your scholarly presentations, because it is a crowdsourced platform, and anybody can just upload anything there. Although we've talked with Wikipedia Philippines on correcting some of these stories. For example, that Cebu comes from the word Cebu, which means to trade, and that it's a shortened form of Sinibuang Hingpit. As if in of all places in the Philippines, only Cebu was trading, and therefore only Cebu had to have the name, had to appropriate the name Cebu for itself. It's naive to say the least, but it is clearly a product of someone's imagination who has very little the pretensions of looking at scholarly material to do this. A second point that I'd like to point out is also again at Wikipedia, which is a very popular social media platform. Here it says that Humabon, later baptized as Don Carlos, was the Raja of Cebu, and that it was that Cebu was an Indianized Philippine polity. There is no evidence, of course, of the Indianization of Cebu. There is no, but you have this in Wikipedia, and so many people pass them around, post them on Facebook, to the point that you even have this one, Indianized Raja, that was a mandala, a polity on the island of Cebu prior to that. Then it was founded by Sri Lumay or Rajamada Lumaya, a minor prince of the Chola dynasty of the Tamils of India, which occupied Sumatra. These kinds of things you find on social media and on the internet today. And it is repeated many times over without a critical reading. To the point that in the book edited by Shyam Saram, published by Springer in Singapore, I think 4 years ago, in the book Cultural and Civilizational Links Between India and Southeast Asia, you find an article by Jofe Santarita, very good analysis on Indianization, but which uses, which says that there was a Rajanate in Cebu, and that Butuan was in itself a Rajanate because of the discovery of a Buddhist golden Tara. One single evidence makes for an entire Hinduized polity, and finds itself in a scholarly article. There are only 2 evidences of the finding of Hindu images in Cebu. One is a crude Ganesha, made of native copper, mentioned in 1926 by the father of Philippine anthropology, Henry Otle Bayer, in his The Philippines Before Magellan, which was published again in 1979 in Readings in Philippine History. The other is a Hindu god Siva, a bronze image found, is evidently, according to him, of the Madhyapahit period. Just because of these 2 evidences, they may have been brought here by Hindu traders who were making gold, selling all kinds of jewelry, including glass beads to pre-colonial Filipinos. They may have brought them with them and had their own personal or family altars with them. Now, it's automatically used by people of no scholarly repute or background to be evidence that Cebu was a Rajanate, and therefore that's why Humabon is called a Raja. If you read Pigafetta, you will realize that the word Raya was actually a term, a cultural borrowing already appreciated by Pigafetta. He found so many of these uses of the word Raya, which is the correct term rather than Raja, being used by other chiefs, as they went along, finding the final route to Malacca, which was the Moluccas, which was the original intent of the Magellan expedition. The other is that there is also a lot of beliefs, even today, when we were excavating the just ended excavations up north, archaeological excavations up north in Cebu. We still found people who would ask us, are these Muslims? Because Humabon was a Muslim. So even until today, this very minute, there are many people who think that Humabon was a Muslim. If only they read Pigafetta. Pigafetta describes the port of Cebu as lined on the shores with makeshift altars, crudely carved idols with hollowed backs. Meat was offered by the Cebuanos to these idols. You don't do that in Islam. It is not allowed to have idols in Islam. Therefore, if you've read Pigafetta, it is clear Humabon was not a Muslim. Pigafetta also vividly describes a babaylan ritual of slaughtering a pig as an offering. Again, Islam abhors pigs. It is haram. It's a sin to partake or to eat the flesh of clove-foot animals, no, like pigs, much less the offering of such meat on makeshift altars. No? That is not allowed in Islam. And then, of course, the recent controversy I had with the good Senator Bongo, which actually was a blessing in disguise. It brought out out into the open this idea that apparently many people in southern Mindanao believe that Lapu-Lapu was a Tausug warrior. There is a book, Chris of Justice, I think that it's a novel that I think partly talks about that, that he was named Khalifa Lapu-Lapu or Salip Pulaka. He was Caliph Lapu-Lapu. For some reason, he was the Caliph, no? Which is not an easy title if you know your caliphate. No? That according to Ijarani Abraham, in a podcast showed to me by a blogger, Max Limpag, he mentions there that Lapu-Lapu was sent by the Sultanate of Sulu to fight the Spaniards because there were reports that Humabon and all the others were already getting cozy with Spanish traders. You must realize, of course, that the Sulu Sultanate was trading with just about anyone and they didn't dislike anyone coming to the islands that they were trading for as long as they would trade. So there's no logic why the Tausug like Lapu-Lapu would be sent. Besides, if Lapu-Lapu was Tausug, Sulu already knew how to make cannons, no? 3-inch cannons. It's clear from their relationship with Brunei that Pigafetta talks about. No? If you read Pigafetta, you remember these very large pearls that look like eggs, according to him, that were stolen by the chief of the Sultan of Lapu-Lapu, of Sulu, from Brunei, and the exchange of I think of a wife of the daughter of the Sulu Sultanate with that of Brunei. It is clear that there were cannons already in Sulu. They already manufactured cannons. So if Lapu-Lapu was Tausug, why the hell would he go to battle with Magellan, armed only with a kris or kalis or a kampilan or spears, when he could have just brought maybe 30 to 40 cannons? And as a result, we would have no Pigafetta. Pigafetta would have been killed together with Magellan with all those cannons fired on the shorelines as they entered the battle site of Punta Pangusan, or now called Punta Engaño, the point of deception. No? So it's very clear that all these are unfounded and uninformed. And it's good that we are in a platform called the National Research Council of the Philippines, so that people can appreciate the idea that research can help us understand our past. But what is the source of all these myths and fakery that is floating all around social media, that so many people share in social media as if these are gospel truths? One of the sources is, of course, Bisaya Patronymics Vizcaya, and I'll talk about that later, and Aginid Bayok sa Tawarik, which was originally called Aginid Bayok sa Maragtas by a very well-known, prolific Renaissance man of Cebu, Jovito Abellana. And then, of course, which I'll talk also later, the waves of migration theory and the Ten Bornean Datos, the fakery hoisted by one Jose Marco. No? Consider, for example, one of these Facebook accounts that is floating all over Facebook today and is passed around. Cebu was populated by the Magalos tribe, who were Muslims, and the first ever recorded slave, blah, blah, blah. And when you look at this, my God, how the hell did we end up in the 21st century with so many of these people, no background in history, no background in research, posting all this and sharing all this and creating all this confusion. The source is, of course, Bisaya patronymics Srivisjaya and the Agibit. The Bisaya patronymics Srivisjaya alone, the title alone. And here you see it was published by the great Jovito Abellana, a literary figure in 1960, says that the word Bisaya comes from this Jaya. And he borrows that from Zaide's Philippine cultural history, also Vishaya, which says that the Visayans were people from the Srivijaya that were scattered after the collapse of the Srivijayan Empire in the 13th century and the takeover of Java Majapahit Empire. How they came to the Visayas and named this entire group of so many islands according into Vijaya or Visjaya is illogical, and yet so many you have this argument. And in this book, which was never published, never presented to historians, never presented to his peer, he was a member of the Cebu Historical Society. He says that Lapu-Lapu had a family name called Dimantag. Of course, family names were not invented in the pre-colonial period. Family names are a product of the Spanish period. Apellidos, no? They were probably, and so you have all this, and then you have that the parents of Humabon, the father of Humabon was Sri Bantog, and that the father of Sri Bantog was Sri Lumay. These are clear recognition. They're clearly trying to, he is clearly trying to point to a Hindu or Indian or Tamil origin for Sugbo. No. But there is no footnote, no evidentiary presentation, nothing at all. This book is clearly a product of the imagination of Jovito Abellana, whose book incidentally on World War II was published during my term as head of the University of San Carlos Press. Those are two different publications, by the way. One is an eyewitness account of the war, and this one is his imagination of the past, based on a very narrow focus that the Sugbo was populated by people from the Chola dynasty led by Humabon. How they came through Sumatra, 3,500 kilometers away, it is not explained. Other myths are that Enrique de Malacca was a Cebuano, an erroneous claim made by historian Carlos Quirino, later a national artist. If you only read Pigafetta's The Circumnavigation of the World, translated by the Skelton translation, it is clear in one of the earlier chapters that Enrique was from Sumatra, and he mentions it there. Why Carlos Quirino made that claim, he's no longer alive to explain to us. But I think it was a product of this nationalist consciousness of the 60s and the kind of claims making to make sure that the Philippines was part of the Pan-Malay world, no? The growing consciousness of a Southeast Asian group of nations. No? Other myths are that the Battle of Mactan did not happen in Mactan, which Pigafetta describes as adjacent to the island of Sugbo, but rather in a sitio which I explored in 2004 called Mactang, a sitio in the barangay Esperanza in the town of Poro Camotes. And that is where, unfortunately, the National Historical Commission of the Philippines unveiled a marker, which I suppose would probably cause a controversy later on, except that if you read the marker carefully, it does not mention that the Battle of Mactan happened in Poro. But there are people in Camotes who still aware, and it's all over Facebook, that the Battle of Mactan happened. If only they read Pigafetta, it is clear that the boats of Magellan, together with other boats, barangayanes of Humabon, left at midnight and arrived at 3 in the morning same morning. Do that today with sails or with oars and go to Camotes and see if you can arrive by traveling from midnight. If you will arrive in Mactang on the other side of Poro Camotes, not on the western side that faces Cebu, but on the eastern side, and see if you arrive there at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's pure, simple logic. It did not happen there on the basis of that time frame alone. The Battle of Mactang, if it indeed happened in Mactang, Esperanza, Poro Camotes, would have happened maybe in the afternoon of the following day. And maybe then Lapu-Lapu would have been defeated because it would probably be high tide. And the boats and the patache that Magellan took with his 50 other warriors, soldiers, would have reached the shores, and the cannon fires, which were 2 cannon fires away because it was low tide in the morning of the battle, would have reached the settlement, the defensive structures of Lapu-Lapu. So simple logic dictates stop distributing all this fakery on social media. So as mentioned earlier, one of these main culprits is SIDE's Philippine Political and Cultural History, which was continuously published until the 1970s. But he talks of the Srivijaya Empire, emerged from Palava's maritime colonialism, dominated Malaysia from the 8th to the 14th century, and all that it was influential in Sulu and the Visayas. And of course, the waves of migration theory. This is the waves of migration theory produced by Jean-Christophe Gaillard in 2002. The waves state that you have these waves coming in from Sumatra. No? The current theory actually is, there's one that says out of Taiwan, it's much debunked. There's another that says the migration to the Mindanao and may have started from Sabah, from Borneo, not from Sumatra, but that would have started thousands of years earlier. Not 300 to 200 BCE, as stated in the early waves of migration theory by H. Otle Bayer. Bayer, of course, was limited by the data and the scholarly material available in his time. So much has happened since then. We now have so much radiocarbon dating. We now have argon dating. We now have advances in laboratory analysis for teeth samples of burials and for studies of pottery and stones and Neolithic stone tools. And they have advanced our theory so much that this is now debunked. But this apparently fed the idea that the Visayas must have been peopled by those coming from Sumatra. Why the Sumatrans or Srivijayans did not proceed to Malay Peninsula or Siam or Kalimantan or Sabah, which were nearer, I do not know. The logic there just doesn't, there's just no logic. It doesn't hold water. One of those that I think we are telling of the kind of period that marks this fakery is the series of forgeries made by Jose Marco of Pontevedra Negros. The most famous being the Code of Calantiao, which was the subject of the doctoral dissertation of William Henry Scott, the lay missionary Episcopalian based in Baguio, who sadly died young because of kidney failure. Famous author, of course, of what Dr. Borinaga mentioned, Barangay, the book Barangay, which has been reprinted many times over by Ateneo Press. And I think everyone who has not read that should buy a copy to learn more. Scott presented his dissertation where he was able to expose all the fakery, the fake documents which were never produced by the minions of Marco. In his dissertation, I think in the 1960s, it's published in one of his books. And a member of his panel was Gregorio Zaide, and Zaide just kept quiet. And until the 1970s, even Malacanang had a code, an order of Calagyaw. And sadly, even until today, you find in the late Cebupedia of the recently departed Clarence Paul Wominal, talks of the Code of Kalansiao, or that the province of Aklan continues, their website continues to use the Ten Bornean datos and all these stories. Even has a precise date on the founding of the province in 1213 by settlers from Borneo. Imagine 10 Bornean datos leaving Borneo, and then you'd imagine each dato would have about 100. Let's just be conservative. At 50 families together with them, you now have 500 families. At 5 per family, you have 2,500. That would have been a demographic debacle for Borneo, to have 2,500 able working men and women suddenly leaving the farms to go to Borneo, to go from Borneo to Aklan. And yet it continues today. So what is the solution to this bakery that surrounds the Lapu-Lapu, Humabon, Sugbo, even the founding of the Visayas, or the root word of the Visayas, or of these 10 Bornean datos? This solution is to read books. And I can cite 4 of these. Earlier, Dr. Borinaga mentioned the 3 published books of Alcina. There's one more important book that has remained unpublished that I hope UST Publishing House would publish that. And then you have Valentino Sitoy's The Initial Encounter, which is a lot. You look at the footnotes and you'll find all the archival data on the pre-colonial period. He mentions, for example, that the word Visayas is a small island in the Visayas that was encountered by the Spaniards. And then, of course, read Pigafetta. I'm sure many of you in the audience have read him. Pigafetta's narrative account of the first navigation, and the 3 versions: Antonio Pigafetta, Maximilianos Transylvanos, and then Gaspar Correa, which is available in libraries. Those are the only ones that I think we can read as documentary evidence. There is also archaeological evidence of the peopling of the Visayas. For example, excavations we carried out in 2011 and 2012. And again, until last week, we were able to show that the peoples of the Visayas were already peopled as early as 1,600 years ago, using one tooth that was radiocarbon dated. From burials we found in 2011. We found iron tools, which are clear evidence that our ancestors were already using iron tools. We did not find iron slugs, but there is evidence of iron slugs in Cebu City, so which means there was manufacturing or recycling of iron to make them into tools. Latest finds we did from last month's excavation, we found so many potteries in 4 burials, which are evidence of peoples of Cebu alone 1,600 years ago, as part of the Northern Cebu Archaeological Project. Now, in downtown Cebu City, excavated in 1967 by Hatterer Tenazas, Carl Hatterer and Rosa Tenazas, they found a Metal Age period around 1100. No evidence there at the time of porcelain. And then you have a late protohistoric period when you begin to see ceramics trading with the Chinese, Vietnamese, and the Thai around 1200 and 1400 CE. Dr. Marcelino Maceda's excavations of Fort San Pedro in 1973 also yielded evidences now at the University of San Carlos Museum of burials dating to the 1400s to the 1500s CE. So, other than speculations, illogical speculations, archaeology can help rescue our knowledge of the past, just as these are the artifacts that we recovered. And then in 2008, in the construction of the subway project the subway tunnel project, we found 4 individual burials, no, on this portion that now form part of the subway tunnel. These are just some of the artifacts that we recovered. So there were about maybe nearly 100 of these ceramic pieces that were recovered in that excavation. In conclusion, why do we have the same problems that started in 1929 of claims making, of making false claims about our past? I think the reason is there is a gap in historical information and knowledge between academics and laypersons, and the tendency of the Filipino, no, to trivialize in order to catch social media attention. You realize, for example, in the issue of Fangod, the tattoo artist who was made into this DOST Academy, that about 2 million of the followers of that academy were Filipinos. There is a lot of Filipino baiting going on all over the world because of the tendency of Filipinos to run to social media to look at trivial things and to post at social media to catch attention and, of course, earn money by posting on YouTube all this fakery. And this is not working well for those of us who are in the humanities, in the social sciences. No? All our articles are published in scholarly journals that nobody reads. We need to popularize, therefore, what we have found. We need to post some more on Facebook, what all our researches. And so we started with the Northern Cebu Archaeological Project. We posted all our finds there every day, what we've done during the archaeological excavation. We have posted. We are preparing a YouTube program also to show our excavations. And I think this is the challenge, I think, to all scholars. You know? Use the social media platform for your talks and for your presentations. But go down to the level of those who love trivia, bullet points and all that. I'm sure everyone is familiar with that. A third problem, I think, in the Philippines is we have a problem with reading. And one of the reasons is that we have a gap between our scholarly publications, which are in English, and the mass of Filipinos who are not so literate anymore in English. A good example, for example, is Vietnam. You go to Vietnam, they have so many bookstores, and all their books are published in Viet language. And you have so many readers, of course, of the local language. This presentation, for example, is in English, should have been presented in Tagalog or in Cebuano. But ako nahihirapan ako mag-Tagalog, so I have to resort to English. But I think eventually all of us are guilty of the kind of platforms we use na hindi tumarating sa masa. The other problem, of course, is you have television. In particular, I would like to point out, for example, on the problems and issues that have emerged with the program of Jessica Soho. What is that program? Jessica Soho? I forgot the title of KMJS. No?
Kapuso Mo Jessica Soho.
Kapuso Mo Jessica Soho, which popularizes the idea that people can just excavate anywhere and dig anywhere and then sell them to the public. And so when you see posts of people of thank you by the way, Dr. Centennial, for the when you post photographs when people that in the midst of our excavations, someone posted a photo selling an arm full of about 18 shell bracelets for sale for 8,000 pesos on Facebook Marketplace. Then people immediately tagged KMJS. This is the kind of insidious media attention that I think even the Katipunan Archaeologists ng Pilipinas Inc. called the attention of KMJS. Eventually, when KMJS started a production on the selling of an ancient rhinoceros tooth about 2 months ago. No? That is not supposed to be what media should be doing. It's supposed to correct, it's supposed to explain, it's supposed to tell the public that this is wrong. no? Instead of trivializing, instead of popularizing the idea that anyone can just excavate and then sell it in public and then call KMGS to explain that, oh, this one was discovered in this town and now she is making money by 100,000 or 200,000. We are up against this kind of insidious media, and I've already talked with some of the producers of KMGS that we should start thinking about whether this impact is good or bad to research, to history, and to our understanding of the past. And that there should be disclaimers in every time they make these kinds of videos, because it is popularizing the idea that treasure hunting is legal, that anyone can just excavate anywhere they want and sell it to the public, to the detriment of our knowledge of the past. So, finally, there is the absence of critical thinking. And it's very clear on people on social media. And I hope I'm not moralizing, but this is what's going on in social media. Everybody passing all kinds of fake stories and then clapping hands and then praising, oh my God, so the Philippines was like this or like that. No? Oh my God, wait, okay. So as the t-shirt from I Love Science states, demand evidence and think critically. For my references, these are the books that I have, that I used in this presentation. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Jobers Bersales, for giving us deeper and more critical, thought-provoking, as I may say, knowledge and understanding of Lapu-Lapu, Cebu, and the larger notions of how we knew national history. We thank you for bringing these interesting insights and clarifications to a larger audience this morning, and hopefully in the other avenues that we potentially could have. We really have to be critical thinkers, especially nowadays in the age of hyper-information. Okay, now let's proceed to our open forum. We shall once again have Dr. Michael D. Pante as our moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Centeno, and thank you, Dr. Bersales, for that wonderful presentation. A lot of controversial topics, and of course, very timely given the current conditions that we are facing, fake news, social media. And so we head on directly to our questions here in our chat box, beginning with one from Ismael Fortunado. Quite a general question, but I think it should frame our discussions moving forward. Why did mythology and history converge or diverge?
Well, when there is a vacuum in history, people tend to fill it up. The problem, I think, is that social media has allowed everyone to just post anything they like. And so many people share them without critically looking at what they are sharing. And so we're up against what Dr. Centeno said, hyper-information. And so it's a challenge to all scholars and researchers, because now you imagine spending time writing your article, doing research, libraries, talking to scholars, and then you're up against a Facebook poster, a blogger that doesn't care about sources. So it's an uphill battle. But I think when there's a vacuum in history, historians should fill that up, or should warn that this is terra incognitus. We don't know what happened. And therefore, that's the conclusion that should be reached, and not fill it up with mythology, with legends.
Indeed, it is an uphill battle, but one which we should never leave to people who don't care about sources. And so moving forward, what do we do next? An anonymous attendee here posts this question: given the latest information gathered to update history, how would an ordinary person know the real updated history? Who or what institute could provide accurate history?
Well, it's the National Historical Commission of the Philippines.
Yes.
And then they should work with CHED and DepEd. And I think they're working now with DepEd and CHED on updating textbooks, on clarifying certain things. The National Quincentennial, the celebration of the Quincentennial has brought out in the open how very little has trickled down to the mass of Filipinos who are suddenly interested in history but cannot find the proper sources. Now, all they have to do is go to the website of the National Quincentennial Committee. Nandyan lahat ng mga sources, even the original Ambrosiano document in Italian of Pigafetta, which was found in the 1890s. It's all there on the website. Now, popularizing them will require, there's always, I think among historians, there's a tendency to, not to disdain, but there's a certain abhorrence to popularizing history. Popularizing history kasi, you don't put sources at the back or yeah, but I think there should be a marriage between popularization and serious critical thought. Comics, videos, and our own blogs and social media. I think historians should start their own blogs already. Scholars, local historians, whatever you do. And there are many who have started that. And this requirement of the Department of Budget and Management now requires a culture and tourism plan before the release of IRA in what is that? Internal Revenue Allotment. Every town and city is now required to have an official history. And they're now looking, so many of these towns have asked scholars and historians to start writing about their town because it's now required by DBM that the official histories be written before you can really get a release of your IRA. I just hope that the kind of historians they will settle for have the proper credentials and are really historians. Yeah. So that's
Thank
a good
you, Dr.
start.
Bersales. Yeah.
Thank you.
Words of wisdom, indeed. But from the general questions, we move to more specific, more detailed questions, such as this one from Leandro Beltran, who asks if I think these were the canons you mentioned in the middle of your presentation. Yeah. Were they called lantakas?
Yes, they were called lantakas, I think. And it's still a word used today by young boys when they fire cannons, 3-inch cannons with kerosene, made of bamboo. Sa lantaka, yes.
Okay. And this one from Vicente Calibo de Jesus. Si Lapu-Lapu was, according to Portuguese historian Gores of Magellan's time, which in Portuguese means old and normally 70 years old. Why do we picture him as a virile, manly, young man?
One, because many Portuguese scholars do not agree with that it's a mistranslation of a different document. That's one, according to Dr. Rene Escalante, that's what he told me. That apparently some scholars in Portugal say that's a different document. Second, it's because Lapu-Lapu was also young once. What is to prevent us from thinking of him when he was young? No? When he was a chief, who was he a young chief? What is to prevent us? It's as if Lapu-Lapu just dropped from heaven at 70 years old. No. He was born in Mactan. He grew up in Mactan. We can even have a statue of a young boy, Lapu-Lapu, in the same manner that you have textbooks of a young boy Rizal, of a Rizal in his in his boyhood days, a Rizal during his teenage. So what is the controversy all about? Why insist on a 70-year-old Lapu-Lapu when you can always have a young Lapu-Lapu?
Indeed, that is correct. Now, this one from Jurgen Primavera. Where are the 100 ceramic and other pieces now housed? Those you mentioned in your presentation. Are they protected?
They are in the official repository of the National Museum of the Philippines in Manila. They are protected. They are well kept. They are inventoried. They are accessioned. They are cataloged. It's not just 100. 100 are probably the ones that are restorable. There are thousands of the sherds, and they're all kept there well. And the plan, I think, of the National Museum is that when the Malacanang sa Subo in Cebu will be completed as the National Museum, Regional Museum branch in the Central Visayas in Cebu, they will be exhibited here. The important ones, the ceramics that were not broken, and then the gold facial covers which were recovered. in situ on site. Yes.
Okay. This one is a comment. Daghang salamat kang Professor Bersoles for an excellent presentation. The one who posted the question asked for your email address, but maybe we can we can post that later on maybe. But thank you for the comment, for the positive comment, Jurgen Primavera. Now regarding scholarly materials which are translated in local languages, I think this is more of a comment on how to enliven our appreciation for history and to remove fake historical quote-unquote facts from our discourse. So we need more materials translated in the local languages. And then another poster here, maybe if more scholarly materials are posted on open access journals, more will be able to appreciate evidence-based materials as sources of historical accounts. Again, regarding the use of sources, Dr. Danilo Hirona published a book on Magellan and the European quote-unquote discovery of the Philippines, published in 2015. It contains many pieces of information that correct many erroneous accounts about the early colonial period. But here is a question directed to you, Dr. Bersales. This one is about the use of materials, especially when publishers are not actually updating their books, especially in elementary, basic education. So how can this presentation help teachers? I think this is in the classroom setup now. How can your presentation help teachers when the publishers themselves, those who publish textbooks, are not updating their materials?
Well, one, it's a challenge to DepEd, and I think there should be a closer collaboration between historical associations and DepEd, for one. Philippine Historical Association, the National Historical Society, all those should write the DepEd as a collegial body, write them to point out all the errors in textbooks. NHCP also should do that if they've not done that yet. So that's the only way to correct, because these are commercial agreements between DepEd to sell textbooks, and private schools. Many private schools prefer certain books, certain authors, and they are locked into 5-year contracts with these textbooks. And so the reality of commercial publishing is upon us. And of course, publishers that print millions for 2,000 or 3,000 elementary schools all over the Philippines will not just pull out their books because of certain errors immediately. So it will take time. It will take time, but I think the beginnings should be that there should be closer collaboration between professional historical associations, professional archaeological societies like CAPI and PHA, and where CAPI, Katipunan Archaeologists ng Pilipinas Inc., started a webinar, I think, or series on teaching archaeology for senior high schools. It's available on Facebook, I think. You can access it, on my Facebook, CAPI, explaining the archaeology of the Philippines to be used by teachers in senior high school. So again, if not for published sources, Facebook is a very powerful tool. So also YouTube, and so we better start talking about YouTube and use TikTok. Somebody asked me, why don't you do 1-minute TikTok dancing while talking about the excavation? I have not reached the point where I want to dance, but I'll probably try 1 minute, trivia, because apparently this country can read only 10 words or 20 words and then move on to the next. So 1 minute things will probably work to young people for now. We're in the world where everything is instant, and started with instant coffee, I think, and we're still here in that. So lack of critical consciousness in the Filipinos that has always been bandied about since the 1960s, it's still with us.
Yes, but do inform us, Dr. Brazales, once you already have a TikTok account. But you're correct. In all seriousness, or you're correct, we do need to focus on social media and basic education, like the one you mentioned regarding textbooks. We need to pay attention to what our students actually learn inside the classroom.
Indeed.
Now,
Yes.
regarding the popularization of historical materials, here's a question from Randy Nobleza. The Cebuano Studies Center has a local history project with the towns and cities of the province. Can these materials, can the project be accessed digitally, considering the new normal conditions?
Well, that project was a project of the province of Cebu. It was not just a project of Cebuano Study Center. The official publisher actually is the province of Cebu. My understanding is there were errors in some of the books that were written. So it would need updating, I think, before it should be made available. Or if it's made available, it's on my back. These books are the 55 volumes of the histories of every town and city of the province of Cebu. But caution must be made, and there should be errata in so many of these where errors were shown to have existed. But yes, the province of Cebu will probably be the one to make this available online.
Thank you for updating us regarding accessing that very important project. Now, this one from Ismael Fortunato. How is good skepticism and bad skepticism? How do these forms of skepticism inform our decision making? Is integrity a call for skepticism?
I'm not a philosopher, but skepticism is an important thing that begins logical thinking. Once you begin to critically question things, that's the beginning of a desire to know more. Curiosity, as long as it does not kill the cat, is good. So as long as skepticism is good and is anchored on a desire to know more and to look for more evidences, then it's good. But if you just, meditate, think of a world so different, and then start writing about it, and then make it and pass it on as historical truths that you found in the Kaban or in the old chest of your grandfather, these documents which were handed down by his great-great-grandfather, that's bad. That is really bad. So as long as mentioned, as long as it's good skepticism, then it will work well. It's a good beginning. That's how you write research papers. You start asking questions. There's always a problem that you would like to solve, and that's the beginning of scholarly work. As long as you know where to look for the answers. But if you just, armchair historian, or you just dream about it, or whatever, that's not good. So that's why the platform is good. National Research Council of the Philippines. This is the very platform that clearly propagates the power of research over half-truths and over falsehoods. So I'm very happy that I'm here, and I'm going to be a member very soon.
That's good to know. That's good to know, Dr. Brazales. And certainly, a healthy dose of skepticism goes a long way when it comes to doing scholarly research. Now, here is a question from an anonymous attendee asking for your take on the indigenization of Philippine history. What's your opinion on this issue?
But I'm not so familiar what is meant by indigenization. Is it using the indigenous language about history, or letting indigenous peoples write their own history? Now, there are two possibilities there. One is using the indigenous language. That's good, but letting indigenous peoples with their recollections, that's ethno-historical recollections, as the history of their peoples. Well, they have every right to do that. Ethnohistory has been a very powerful tool in understanding localities, in understanding events, for as long as they are verified and validated. That is why in research with indigenous peoples, validation is important, and triangulation. When someone tells you a myth and another tells you another myth, and they don't match, then you triangulate, you validate, you look for the commonalities, you look for the majority. There are measures of validity and reliability in statistics that can also be held true in qualitative research. In this instance, ethno-historical accounts or indigenous accounts can be weighed on the balance of qualitative research, which is triangulation, validation, verification. If only one person talks about it and you ask other indigenous peoples, did this happen? Did Dato so-and-so cut a tree and it became a golden boat? And they say, no, that's not the name or something. Then you have a way of confirming or qualifying or correcting. So be careful. Just because you know a certain account told to you by someone and you write about it, doesn't mean the account is real. You have to triangulate, you have to validate, you have to talk to as many people. And that's where the power of anthropology is important. Participant observation, living in the community. Now, if you're a member of the indigenous community, the problem there is, of course, bias. You're already part of the community. Then, how do you validate? You show it to someone who is not part of the community or is from another community and see if there is a problem with validity and reliability. After showing it with your own people, of course.
Yeah, Dr. Barsales, thank you for that. But I think the original poster posted a follow-up on that question. The anonymous attendee clarifies, by indigenization, it refers to the use of theoretical lenses in writing Philippine history or historiography.
Okay, we've reached the level of theory already.
Yes.
It's a valid platform. It's a valid position. Many anthropologists have always called into question colonialism and the colonial lens that has guided all of us scholars. No? In Philippine archaeology, for example, there is the tendency to nationalize archaeology to show what is the best, to show that we're better than Indonesia or Malaysia, and we have this and we have that and all that. No? And the indigenous theorizing is an important concept. It's an important methodology. It's important to adding voices to our understanding of the past. No? So it should be welcomed. It should be welcomed. Anyway, it's theory. It's not a generalization. It's just a presentation of hypothesis that's shown to be correct to a certain body of knowledge. So there's nothing wrong with that.
Thank you, Dr. Barsales. And now, I think we have room for one more question before we proceed to, or inviting once again, Dr. Borinaga to have the both of you for an extended Q&A. But this one is critical, I think, given that we have been talking about history as taught in the classroom and the limitations of our materials. From Presilda Rebato, giving us the perspective of the Filipino youth, since it was mentioned that some of the information or pieces of information from Wikipedia are not accurate, is it still possible for us students to cite materials in the internet where we can get accurate information? Is there a way for us, for students, to get accurate information from the internet? Because it's really convenient for these students to simply get it from the internet.
Yes, look at the authors of the one posting on the internet. Look at their background. Look at their qualifications. If you find, for example, someone posting and you don't know where he is from, whether he is a historian or teacher, so there is a disciplinary qualification for posting facts and data. No? And look at the references of what is posted. No? Kung walang reference yan and it's just posted there as if it's fact, then they should begin to question. Saan kaya galing itong statement na ito? No, every responsible internet blogger or someone, a scholar who posts on the internet knows his responsibility to cite every fact that is posted there that he or she borrows or got from somewhere else. Or if he or she got it from research, then it should be mentioned that during my fieldwork in blah, blah, blah. And so look at the author, look at the platform, look at the website, look at the web page, critically analyze that source. Don't just copy paste everything from there. And so there's an author's name, type it. Find out who or he or she is. Look at his LinkedIn, his Facebook, or anything. There are ways to verify sources in the internet if you just spend time to verify them. Wikipedia, of course, every teacher will tell you never use Wikipedia on your thesis, your student papers, your baby thesis, your dissertation, because that's a crowdsourced information. Even if they put references there, no, the reference is good. Go to the reference directly. Don't use Wikipedia. They have references at the bottom. Go to that reference and read it. And then check who wrote the reference and find out if that person who wrote it is of good reputation or just picked it up somewhere. That's my advice.
And thank you for that wonderful piece of advice, Dr. Bersales. And we welcome once again Dr. Borinaga, who's here to answer, once again, questions from participants in our Zoom meeting. And we do have one, and I want to pose this question to both of you because this is a crucial question regarding regional take on the Visayan language from Randy Nobleza. Regarding the Visayan language as regional lingua franca, what's your take on National Artist Resil Mojares' idea on cross-Visayan studies, on a cross-Visayan studies center? Western Visayas, Samar Leyte, Cebuano Studies. Maybe we can begin with you, Dr. Borinaga. What's your opinion on this issue?
Perhaps we can start with Vocabulario de la Lingua Bisaya by Mateo Sanchez, which is already available in the internet. And if you read across, read through the entire thing, at least browse through the entire thing, we realize that Visayans, whether Cebuano now or Ilonggo or even Waray, would realize that at least 1/3 of the items listed there are no longer familiar to us, and that we can also we will also notice that once upon a time there were words that just one word for all these things, for all the across the Visayas before they splintered. In the Sanchez dictionary, there are words now that are only used by Cebuanos, also only used by Ilonggo, and only used by the Warays. But once upon a time, it seems that people across the Visayas understood each other before their languages petrified due to what I theorize as the impact of colonization and the Moro raids. They could no longer travel freely across the islands.
Yes. But Dr. Borinaga, what about the idea of a cross-Visayan study center?
You cannot, when we use Sanchez dictionary as a reference, we cannot avoid about being cross-Visayans, because here is one book that included all Visayans once upon a time.
Thank you. Dr. Bersales, your take on this matter?
Well, Dr. Rolly already answered it. I agree with him. There is also Mentridas vocabulario, but it's limited to Cebu and Panay. But it is very clear that colonization ended all the exchanges that were going on in the Visayas. And so therefore, the national artist is correct. Let us remove the colonial yoke experience and go back to our roots at the pre-colonial period. There were no boundaries of language and of trading and exchange between us. The regionalization was a product of the divide and conquer of the Spaniards. No? They really found it necessary to stop the Cebuanos from revolting, the Ilonggos from revolting, and so they divided all these islands from each other. You know? But one thing you will realize, the Diocese of Cebu, when it was established in 1595, covered the whole of the Visayas and Mindanao and up to the Marianas. What does that mean? That means it had control over the rest of these groups of islands. No? Of course, the language used at that time for the mass was Latin, but at the level of discussions of friars, they were already looking at the languages of the natives they were converting. And sadly, that is the saddest part. Many of the vocabularios are written by the earliest missionaries, like Martin de Rada, who had a vocabulario of the Cebuano in 1569 or around that time, has disappeared. So also you would imagine, or all the other Augustinians who would not start doing mission work without learning local languages. It would have been a good start. A cross-Visayan studies will work very well because one, geography is the same. Our maritime characteristics are unquestionable. We are all islands, and so therefore we share a lot of things more in common than the language that divides us today, because of the specificity that language tends to create. The more you develop internally, the more you evolve internally, then the language also goes with that. But across Visayan Study Center allows us to look beyond our own narrow confines and establish the true relationships that were there before the Spaniards came.
Thank you very much. And since we're talking of cross-Visayan similarities, here's an interesting take from Nestor Nimes. Kung isa lang ang pinanggalingan, bakit ang Western Visayas na iba ang dialects or maybe languages, say Hiligaynon, Ilonggo, at Negros? Are the languages in Western Visayas really that different from the rest of the other Visayan languages? Dr. Brinaga, Dr. Bersales? Your take on it.
So Father Chirino actually, Father Chirino only noted that Karaya was rather different from Bisaya, and by Bisaya at the time he actually included what we now call the Hiligaynon or Ilonggo. So this was just Karaya and Bisayan language.
Actually, I just want to add, since Nestor Nimes also posted a follow-up, Meron Island in Samar, Merong Island sa Samar, ang Kapul Island, iba ang kanilang dialect. Ano masabi nyo rito? Hindi sila Bisaya o Waray man?
It's an anthropological product. It's a product of isolation, I think. But I think the better answer would be that is exactly what across Visayan studies should do, to understand the differentiations that have been created over time. And therefore, the power of across Visayan studies is to make us understand why we are different from each other today and how we can overcome those differences.
Dr. Borinaga, you were about to say something.
Okay. So there's actually folklore because the Kapu language has been studied, and it says it's 90% Samal language of near Hulo, and the folklore has it that Father Alcina mentioned that from Hulo they actually wanted to get wife materials from Samar, and it seems while waiting, one tribe actually waited out and virtually settled in Kapul while their chief was trying to wait for the go signal for a Samar lady to marry. So that's the folklore aspect, and that could explain why we had virtually a Samal language group in Kapul, Northern Samar.
Thank you. And since we're still on this topic, once again, we have another question pertaining to language. What about those areas that are now not technically or politically part of Visayas, such as Masbate, Bicol, but somewhat related to the Visayans in language, in culture. What's your take on bringing them into a cross-Visayan kind of study center? What's your position on this?
Actually, Bicol language still considered Bisaya.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, when I deciphered the Baybayin writings on the Monreal stones in Masbate, the words used belong to now many dialects: Masbatenon, Bicolnon, Ilonggo, and even Waray. So once upon a time, all these words belong to one language group, and that was what I call the Supra-Bisaya language group, which basically represented by Father Sanchez's dictionary.
And once again, another but this one is a comment rather than a question from Sanli Abila. Sanli comments, Akranon, Aklan's main dialect is a very different language compared to most of Ilonggo, including Kinaray-a. So here we do have a lot of interesting topics when it comes to languages in the Visayas. It's certainly a field of study that needs to be given more attention by our researchers and scholars. Maybe this could be the last question for our webinar this morning. Could it be that certain practices of pangangayaw, or maybe not just pangangayaw, but maybe other practices documented by early colonial missionaries, could it be that they were seen by the chroniclers and used it to fortify their invented notion of the aswang, to disenfranchise our local babaylans and Catalonans? And I'm posing this question to both of you, Dr. Borinaga, Dr. Bersales, once again pertaining to the idea of being critical and being skeptical of our sources. What if the very primary sources that we use are themselves full of biases and exaggerations? How do we deal with this?
Mauna ka, Jobers?
Ikaw, sir, it's Alcina man.
Okay, Alcina. Actually, the thing there is that the chroniclers actually put a very negative interpretation of the word aswang. Aswang is actually plain and simple supernatural power, but since our babaylans were not Christians, then they could only have been devils. Now I have failed to mention that the Karakoa at that time, some Karakoas, the big ones, were called aswangan, which means they had supernatural powers, such that when the enemy saw a Karakoa that is called aswangan, they were already, at least they would be very scared. They would look no longer at the warriors riding on the aswangan Karakoa, but on the boat, war boat itself. No? So it was not originally witchcraft. The meaning of aswang was just plain and simple supernatural power.
Yeah, good.
Yes, Dr. Bersales, go ahead.
Well, that's why I wanted Rolly to answer that, because Alcina explains that clearly, that our interpretation of aswang today is very different from what it was in the past. And anyway, all mangayaws were never done without a ritual, without the babaylans performing these rituals. So there is indeed a connection between pangayaw and aswang, and the labeling of the aswang as evil, because the Spaniards suppressed anything that would be tantamount to the people rising up or getting power from somewhere in order to defeat the Spaniards. And it's a continuing suppression of all these possibilities of power that the Spaniards do in the entire history of until the Katipunan Revolution. And the Katipunan, of course, did not utilize aswang. They used Masonic symbols and anting-antings, which are in themselves, a connection to superpowers, to looking at superpowers, to repel, to eventually throw away the Spaniards. No? So the statement, that the question actually is valid. There might indeed, and as Rolly has shown, a connection between labeling the aswang and all these hunting expeditions. No one would go hunting without first asking permission from the forest if you're going to hunt, or a babaylan for large-scale hunts for slaves or for wives or for whatever purposes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bersales, and thank you, Dr. Barinaga, for answering all our questions. I learned a lot personally. I learned a lot, and I'm sure all of our participants have learned and have gained a lot of insights, especially in terms of correcting misconceptions, correcting Eurocentric biases, historical fallacies, and the like. And once again, I also want to thank our participants here in the Zoom room for posting your comments, your questions. I'm sorry I cannot accommodate all of your questions this morning, but we do appreciate your active participation here in our webinar. And so with that, I now turn you over to Dr. Centeno for the closing ceremony of our webinar.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Dr. Michael Pante, for that excellent job in moderating our open forum. Of course, we want to thank our lecturer, Professor Bersales, for answering questions and responding to comments. And also, of course, to Professor Borinaga for entertaining more questions from our participants this morning. I am sure our 600 or 700 plus audience members are virtually clapping now. Can I see some virtual claps? A round of applause for our speakers this morning, everyone. Professor Borinaga and Professor Bersales. And of course, thank you and congratulations to Dr. Michael Pante. Daghang salamat sa inyong lahat. Thank you. Okay, as we mentioned earlier, we have more in store for you aside from the public lectures. The National Research Council of the Philippines is proud to announce the start of the National Quincentennial Commemorations Kabataan Paint. Morning, we have with us the official of NRCP who ensures the success of every NRCP event. My pleasure to call on Executive Director Dr. Marieta Banyes Sumagaysay.
Thank you, Doc Dave. Maupay nga aga hangatanan for the warais. Maayong buntag sa tanan for those from Cebu, and for those from Iloilo, we say maayong aga. My warm greetings to our local chief executive who gave us an inspiring story of Leyte earlier, Governor Dominic Petilla. Good morning to NRCP President Dr. Gregorio E.H. Del Pilar, and to all the governing board members, especially to Dr. Hope Yu, the chair of the NRCP Division of Humanities, who gave an inspiring opening message earlier. Our greetings also, of course, to our lecturers, Dr. Rolando Borinaga of UP Manila School of Health Sciences located in Palo Leyte, and to Dr. Jose Eleazar Bersales from USC. To our moderator, Dr. Michael Pante, good morning. Good morning also to all our guests and participants. We have the directors of DOST regional offices. I saw them in the box earlier. And also those from attached agencies of the DOST, those from DepEd, the Mindanao Development Authority, our media friends, and those from the National Historical Commission. Also, warm greetings to our colleagues from the academe, our partners from government, institutions, and civic groups, and of course to our students. Special greetings to NRCP members. This third Quincentennial lecture, which the NRCP has carefully organized, is for you all. And I'm happy that this session has been very engaging. And congratulations to all of you. We may not be historians, but listening to stories of how it was in the past and how it shaped us today and will influence our future is surely something that warms our souls and feeds our minds. I saw in the chat box messages like, I can't wait to go back to my hometown. Or someone said, I remember my high school history class. Mingaw, no? The learnings we just gained this morning from the scholarly works of our speakers are one for our taking, either for further research, for use in our instructions, for program development towards nation building, or for policy making. There were reflections from our participants. I quote, very dangerous to believe unfounded accounts in social media. May isa pa, kung maibabalik ang nakaraan, alin ang pwedeng mapakinabangan ng bagong henerasyon? Napakagandang reflections, di ba? I am a full-blooded Waray. I come from Tanawan Leyte, a second-class coastal town with a rich human resource that figured in local history. I have experienced quite a major part of what Dr. Borinaga shared, like the balay-balay and bata-bata when I was in my elementary grades. I speak many of those words enumerated and with the same meaning as it had before. In fact, Dr. Borinaga is a colleague and we have worked for some time at the UP. And local history has always created a resilient emotional connection with me. And I would like to believe it does the same for you. Local history is a story that resonates, having a particular meaning and importance to us.
Recording
There is
stopped.
one thing that I always cherish in the stories of my elders, as well as from the writings generally for the Visayas, is the bravery and courage of our ancestors. They were smart, they were cunning. And NRCP thanks Dr. Borinaga for his unraveling of Alcina's Historia de Visayas. Salamat han imo pagpaambit han imo aram. Thank you for sharing your expertise. The Cebu or Lapu-Lapu part is popular to us, but the myths and misconceptions that were surfaced earlier are really eye-openers and gives us more reasons for intelligent discourse. Daghang salamat, Dr. Bersales, sa imong pagbuyagyag sa kadtong mga sayop nga pagsabot sa atong kaagi. Thank you for bringing to fore these myths and emphatically pointing the importance of research and the appeal to us not to use, worse, to share fake news, forgeries, and those that cannot even stand simple logic. As scholars, I join our speakers in inviting everyone to be more vigilant of what we teach and what we believe in. I like that message t-shirt. Demand evidence and think critically. To our speakers today, please accept NRCP's sincere gratitude. Your lectures are not the kind we usually hear inside the classrooms. And may I relate to you one chat from Leia, Austria. Sabi niya, what made you both resource speakers enjoy learning and relearning indigenous culture and history of our country? What motivates you that we could take away and make us realize to pass it on to our learners and Filipino young generation? So Dr. Borinaga and Dr. Bersales, aside from the learnings, you must have inspired many of us today. Thank you and congratulations. And our thanks also goes to Dr. Pante and Dr. Centeno for ensuring the smooth flow of our third NQC lecture series. To our guests, thank you for spending this morning with us. We will have 3 monthly NQC lectures, and NRCP brings you the Mindanao story next month, after the Visayas today, and the Luzon, we had it last month. So 3 more until the end of December. Please visit the NRCP official Facebook page, the Research Pod, for updates and announcements. And may I remind everyone, and this was announced by Doc Dave earlier, the call for entries to the NQC Kabataan Painting Competition is on, and we will expect submissions by November 5. Winners will be announced on December 8. And we're excited to receive entries from our youth and listen to their voices through the colors and shapes on canvas. We thank Dr. Hope Yu and her team for leading the conduct of this painting competition. There are more to look forward to from NRCP until the end of this year. We have 11 back-to-back, back-to-basic, B2B online classes on science, math, and the arts for elementary and high school. We have another 11 expert online classes on issues of national concern for policymakers and development planners. And next month, we will have the 11th K-TOP webinar, a quick study under the kapakanan ng tao sa oras ng pandemya. The topic will be on predicting COVID case using regression analysis. Still another, we are looking forward to the launch of the NRCP History Book, where our 6 authors, led by Dr. Francis Dialogo, writes on the role of the NRCP on the development of science in the country. So stay tuned to Research Pod and our website and join NRCP in our events. Better still, join NRCP as a member. Application is online. Dr. Bersales and Dr. Borinaga, you are much welcome to the NRCP family. So on this note, I officially close the 3rd NQC lecture series. Congratulations for another meaningful event. To everyone, I wish you all to keep safe and to always remember, mask, hugas, iwas, at bakuna for your protection. Daghang salamat. Damo nga salamat. Hangatanan.
Maraming salamat. Dagang salamat. Thank you very much, Executive Director Dr. Mayet. Thank you so much. And also thank for that reminder at the end to keep safe. I agree with you, ma'am. Today has taught us much about our past, but how we are going to make use of this to our advantage in the present and to better our future is up to us. May these lectures provide a deeper understanding and knowledge of who we were, who we are, and will be. We thank everyone for joining us in this 3rd public lecture in celebration of the 2021 National Quincentennial Commemorations. We thank again our distinguished lecturers who have shared with us their expertise. Thank you too to the Honorable Governor Petilla of Leyte and to our NRCP officials who have made this occasion fitting and significant. We thank too the technical team led by Dr. Jerry Petilla, the Chief Administrative Officer of the NRCP, and the Red Root Artists Cooperative led by Mark Villarin. We hope to see you in our upcoming public lectures as announced by Doc Mayet. The 4th public lecture will be on the 8th of September. Today, we had a discussion on the Visayas region. On September 8th, we go to Mindanao with interesting topics about Mindanao history and culture. But before you press that leave button, everyone, we request you to open your video screen, if you can, for a quick screenshot, so that we can say to our children, we will have this memorabilia that we have been part of the NQC commemorations, which is only, which happens once in the lifetime. Imagine that, 500 years, quincentennial of the victory in Mactan and the first circumnavigation of the world. So everyone, please give us your most beautiful, most TikTok-worthy, Instagrammable, Facebook post-worthy smile. Everyone, please. Okay, everyone say NRCP. Okay, our secretariat is taking our picture, so just keep that lovely smile. All right, smile, smile. We have around 600 to 700 participants. That's a large audience. Congratulations, everyone. Congratulations, NRCP. Okay. Ayan, I could see your smiles from all over the Philippines, or perhaps some parts of the world as well. Okay, once again, thank you very much for joining us. And finally, may we encourage everyone to fill out the evaluation form to avail of the e-certificates. Link is provided or pasted in the group chat. Kindly find that link for your feedback and for you to get your e-certificate. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much again, everyone, for joining us. Again, thank you. This has been your host. Congratulations, NRCP. And I am Dave Centeno. I also want to remind everyone to keep safe and be healthy. Have a nice day. Have a good lunch. Bye-bye. Stay safe.